Thank you for joining us. So the meeting of the Texas Opioid Abatement Fund Council will come to order, and the time is 10:12 a.m. Thursday, October the 6th, 2022, pursuant to the notice of the meeting, which is filed with and posted with the Office of Secretary of State on July 29, 2022. This council will consider only those matters that have been posted, and I direct that a copy of the notice be attached to the minutes of this meeting. The meeting materials will be displayed during the WebEx meeting. They are available here in the room for those that wish to use the extra copies, and will be available on our website or by submitting a request to my office following the meeting. Members, please remember the ability to hear and see you determines if you are present for the meeting, which is why it is important for you to have your camera on and audio working as well. Votes will be taken by a voice vote today. If we lose our WebEx connection for some reason and are unable to restore it, we will end the meeting and notify members via email. We will take breaks during today's lengthy agenda meeting, including lunch break at 12, and then come back together at 12:45 today. One more housekeeping matter. Corey Castillo, one of my associate deputies of operations and support, will be acting as my designee maybe later today and possibly in future meetings if I have a conflict. And so now I'll ask Amanda, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Councilor. Council members, please respond by answering present when I call your name, and remember that you must be visible to be counted as present. So thank you for your cameras on. Councilor Hager.
Here.
Dr. Carrie DeMore.
Here.
Dr. Emmanuel Eloise.
Present.
Ron Enriquez.
Present.
Dr. Pedro Fernandez.
Present.
Dr. Robert Ibarra.
Present.
Dr. Lori Horan-Stacker.
Present.
Dr. John Mills.
Present.
Dr. Scott Milton.
Present.
Dr. James Munns.
Present.
Dr. Sanjay Patel. Dr. Douglas Horton.
Present.
Dr. Denise Wilkes. Catherine Yoder.
Present.
Right. There being 12 members present, quorum is established. Members, thank you for your attendance at today's meeting. We will have a few items on the agenda specifically related to the council. We'll spend most of our time learning about current efforts in responding to the opioid and fentanyl crisis in fellow state agencies. Members, you will notice that we will now consider adoption of the minutes of the August the 9th, 2022 council meeting. Members, you have a copy of the minutes from last week that were sent to you, and they're also being displayed on the screen now. Is there any corrections or questions regarding those minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve the minutes of the August 9th, 2022 council meeting?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Second.
Members, if you don't mind making sure you're unmuted, and again, we use voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No members abstaining? Okay, thank you. The motion passes. There being 12 ayes, 0 nays, and 0 members abstaining. All right, now we'll move on to agenda item number 3. Members, we heard from all of you that it would be helpful to know a little bit more currently what's going on across Texas from different communities to fight the opioid crisis. Several state agencies are here to present to us today to do just that. While we are receiving information about the state agencies' funding sources for their current efforts, this is not a request for funding presentations, as we do not have an application process set up at this time. Some agencies are going to provide written information as a resource for us to view on our own. I appreciate your patience as well as moving through today's agenda and the presenters for providing us with concise information on the issues. Now I will call upon Colonel Stephen McGraw of the Texas Department of Public Safety to provide an overview of their actions and efforts to address opioid and fentanyl crisis. Colonel?
Thank you very much, council members. Fentanyl certainly, well, all drugs that have been a concern of the department over the years, and we saw the Great Lakes states, and we saw the Northeast, we saw Florida, and other parts, and certainly central eastern coast of the United States having an epidemic of opiate overdoses was a concern, even back then. And quite frankly, at that point in time, and we're going back 5 years, the key problem from Texas standpoint in terms of overdoses and impact is methamphetamine. And literally methamphetamine hadn't improved over the period of time, but but what other states were experiencing, we weren't experiencing, but we are now. And really, in a manner that we hadn't anticipated. Before, the fentanyl, primarily coming from China, in that regard, competing in the market, was fed to or went to those that were addicted to opiates and therefore, consuming those, and they had overdose because of the lethality of it. I think everybody already knows that, 0.2 milligrams, certainly a DEA task force often can talk about it, is enough, is a lethal dose enough to kill someone. And just looking at DPS numbers alone, just DPS, not DEA, not CBP, not OFO and the bridges, not HSI. Looking at DPS numbers since March 21, and we've seen enough fentanyl in terms of lethality to kill over 337 million Americans. So that's the potency of it. And what we saw in terms of the shift and didn't anticipate is that how it's impacted Texas more than any other reason is not because we had a large heroin addiction problem, which was some of the problems back east, or even prescription drug problem in terms of Oxycontin, oxycodone, other analogs that are related to our synthetic opiates related to heroin and morphine. What we are seeing now is what's most concerning, and it's had an impact on Texas, and you see it witnessed in terms of the overdose deaths, is that Mexican cartels, because they know no bounds, number one, they care not, they're trying to make money. The bottom line is that they've taken over in terms of fentanyl production with precursor chemicals that they get from China and India, and really manufacturing fentanyl. And the advantage to them in fentanyl production, unlike heroin production, where you got to grow a crop, you got to worry about poppies and so forth and so on. There's something to be done around the clock, 24/7. And it's not just that they're pumping it into the market so you can buy, powdered fentanyl or crystallized fentanyl. What they're doing is that they've we'll say contaminated, but they've replaced it with other drugs, whether it's methamphetamine, cocaine, and other drugs to make it more addictive. But the real threat, the state of Texas, and to our children and our young people, is the counterfeit drugs they're producing. And whether it's Adderall, it doesn't matter what it is, Oxycontin, oxycodone, Xanax, Abatement, they have figured out a way through pill presses to make them almost exactly alike. You can't discern the difference. And the problem with that is that they're pushing that. What is the maximum dose and lethality? They don't really care. Certainly, you wonder why are they killing their customers? Well, they're just not that careful. The bottom line is they're making money, and they're getting more addicts as a result of it in their product, and it's in demand, and they keep changing it in that regard. You keep hearing about rainbow fentanyl. It's just colorful pills that look like Pop-Tarts or something else that you want to eat along those lines. And importantly, the DA administrator testified, and certainly their head of their laboratory testified, that 4 out of 10 pills that they test that have fentanyl in it, 4 out of 10, are hot pills. It means they have an excess of 2 milligrams, or at least 2 milligrams or more of fentanyl. That's remarkable. Okay, 4 out of 10. So when I think this DEA came up with it, I'm not sure one pill will kill. It sounds a little point. That's exactly what. And so what you hear from parents that lost a child is that this is not an overdose death. The child intended to take Adderall or a Valium or a Xanax. Well, this is a poison. And what the cartels or the suppliers that have done this, knowingly the risk in that regard, have provided it. And this, of course, from a Texas standpoint, is very alarming. And as I indicated before, the Mexican cartels control that market. And there's no end in sight. And they increase the potency of methamphetamine. They've taken over that industry in Texas with not just in terms of super labs, but factories that produce meth around the clock. And you don't need, unlike cocaine, you don't need cocoa paste. You don't need to grow cocoa plant. The bottom line is you have it. Something you can produce. So right now, the number 1 and 2 drugs in Texas is going to be just methamphetamine and fentanyl. And certainly fentanyl is the most concerning because it's really acting as a poison more than anything. In terms of our efforts, you have to a little bit about our efforts in that regard. It goes back to who the enemy is. I mean, it's the cartels that are producing it. It's the cartels that are transporting it, smuggling it. So cartels that collaborate with transnational MS-13, MS-18, and state-based gangs, whether it's Texas Mexican Mafia here in Austin, Texas Syndicate, Tango Blast, Houston Tango Blast, West Texas Tango Blast, Barrio Azteca, gangs, okay, those typical prison gangs that provide both support to the cartels and stash houses in terms of their operation of human smuggling and trafficking, but also drug trafficking as well. And that's obviously a major concern. We work closely with DEA, we work closely with FBI, our federal partners, to do criminal enterprise investigations that target command and control elements of Mexican cartels that operate throughout Texas. And we also, from a priority standpoint, state police standpoint, there's a disproportionate impact in violence with gangs. And so that intersection there is a focus. And one of the things that the state of Texas is really leading the nation doing is investing in these Texas anti-gang centers. And simply put, is that, first of all, everybody's working in the same gangs, the same conspiracy at some point in time. So to the extent that we can get everybody, all our federal partners, all our local partners, and certainly us in the same co-location to be able to target gangs. And the first one's in Houston, and certainly we have one in San Antonio, we have in North Texas. And in McAllen, we have one. Bottom line is that it's important. That's a key piece in it because that's where it gets out on the streets. That's where the retail distribution occurs. That's, of course, like I mentioned before, in terms of disproportionate amount of violence. But it takes an entire spectrum in terms of law enforcement capabilities, but it also takes education. And that's one of the reasons that you've seen some, the governor's been going around the state and meeting with local law enforcement leaders and public health leaders and trying to get the word out. Because, if the kids don't realize, or even when they do realize there's a risk, and at that age, hey, they're risk takers anyway. I mean, we got to do something to inoculate them, protect them from themselves. And also, go after anybody that would dare, provide a counterfeit pill that has fentanyl in it. So we're doing that aggressively as we can, working with our partners, local, state, and federal partners, and we'll continue to do so. And that concludes my short presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be able to follow up.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah. Ron. Oh, and before Phil, thank you for being here. Good to see you.
I would just like to say that I've worked in cases with tag offices, and they are extremely efficient and well set up to kind of attack a problem in the community. Would we have to expand the mission of the tag office in order to
No
investigation towards fentanyl?
No. It's been flexible, just like, for example, Houston, serial robbery crews was the problem. Okay, for a while, takeovers and Jack in Boxes and Walmart and other locations. So we adapted violent crime squads. So there's no reason it can't be shifted in that regard. And quite frankly, the priority of priorities is that right now. And they moved to catalytic converters instead of takeover robberies, but fentanyl is the key piece. We saw that in West Texas. We were talking about the same thing in Midland and Odessa that we're seeing here. So, yes, sir.
Is there a requirement to change the state law? Because isn't the state law based on how many grams of a particular substance you have classified as a felony? And this stuff is so potent that you're talking about a grain of rice or 2 grains of rice being fatal. I think the laws are a little bit out of date because if they catch them with a certain amount of fentanyl, it could be fatal doses of fentanyl, but it doesn't meet the criteria for felony convictions.
Well, selling it would be a felon, but to your point is that the lethality is so much so. What about, is there more? And I know that there's been policymakers, that's out of our realm, have talked about treating it like a poison, like it's a homicide. If you knowingly do it, it meets the certain elements in terms of moving forward with the legislature. And frankly, that works better, from a law enforcement standpoint, because we do want a deterrent. And to your point, the deterrent, it just doesn't seem much. Possession, we get right down to possession. We're still talking about a legal drug used illicitly. So to your point, if you're possessing it, it's a different crime versus distributing it. But distributing it right now is a felony in Texas.
Thank you.
So what do you think as an agency with fentanyl compared to other drugs, or is the smuggling in not significant change in patterns, behaviors. It's easy to get in a bunch of pills that are extremely high potent compared to some other types of drugs. So it's easily to smuggle it in. Obviously, it's a big challenge that you see, a bigger challenge today than before.
Yes, sir. And it, the consequences of an unsecured international border is, not only in terms of methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, now fentanyl, it's wherever the cartels take over, decide to dominate. And if you got a drug problem in somewhere in the United States, whether it's New York City, whether it's Seattle, it's really a Mexican cartel problem, and it's related to the unsecured international border. And what we're concerned about is obviously when you have essentially a global mass migration event, is what's occurring right now from around the world, is you overwhelm the U.S. Border Patrol in their frontline defense. You take them off the line and have them detaining and processing. Okay, and that's the problem or the challenge for us, for DEA, for anybody. That's every law enforcement agency in the state of Texas, is because they are overwhelmed. Therefore, it leaves huge gaps. And you've talked to landowners, I know, in South Texas, and you understand the frustration in terms of when they have people moving across. Well, it's the same people, okay, that we're dealing with. It's the cartels that are reaping billions over it in that regard, and so it's a win-win for the Mexican cartels. The sea change here is this: is that the counterfeit pills. Okay, before they're lacing drugs, which you would expect to get. You're going to take, you're shooting up methamphetamine, you're taking a risk. You shoot up heroin, you're along these lines. You're taking risks that are calculated, and you're an addict in that regard. We're talking about reaching the non-addict population, and essentially poisoning, because there's the perception this is an Adderall. Okay, it's a Xanax. Well, you don't expect that you're risking your life taking a Xanax or an Adderall or other pharmaceutical prescription drugs. And unfortunately, kids, you can counsel them, you can tell them, and they're risk takers, and they may do it on a bed or something like that. And they just one time, and they lose their lives. And that's that's the difference. That's the big difference that we're seeing right now. And because they're mass producing it, and I think there's been some publicity lately about the rainbow, fentanyl. But get it, because it appears that they're targeting kids. Well, they're just trying to make money.
That's right.
They could care less about the kids.
Right.
Can I ask a question? Thank you.
Sure.
So you've sort of alluded to, sometimes when I think about just addressing supply, it feels like whack-a-mole.
Yes.
You knock this one down, something else pops up. So you mentioned sort of getting the word out to youth. We know that campaigns of awareness raising will be a part. Are there systems of collaboration that you would like to see to really get our arms around the complexity of the issue in addition to supply?
Yeah, obviously the demand part is always a concern. And getting the word out. You want parents, you want teachers, you want friends, okay, friends, and you want to make it so where it's just, it becomes less cool, okay, right, to say it that way, but you don't want, you want to inoculate them and to protect them from themselves in that regard. That's the ultimate thing, okay, there's not the demand. The cartels they'll keep producing it. It's just we won't be seeing the deaths in that regard. Unfortunately, the other part in terms of collaboration is certainly the Drug Enforcement Administration, other federal agencies, even the intel community are working it. But unlike Colombia, where we had some successes going after the Medellin and Cali cartel and a number of different in the Caribbean corridor, in Mexico, we've not had those successes. And even though there's a very robust program the DEA runs with the country attaché there with the ambassador, and a lot of things being done. Ultimately the cartels, certainly they're a public safety threat to the United States, to Texas, and to every community, and they're really a domestic security threat to Mexico. Because of between corruption, intimidation, and coercion, and we'll call it intense violence. They're using the same tactics that terrorist organizations use to go after. To intimidate and coerce, which you get that question, are they terrorist organizations? Well, they're for profit. They're not motivated by ideology. So you get that technicality there, but they certainly are creating terror. is certainly intimidating, and they're certainly engaged in some of the most brutal acts you can imagine that just don't get coverage because if you're a journalist, you just don't cover cartels here in Mexico because you'll get killed. That's the level of influence that they have. And that's one of the reasons I know that recently, and certainly the governor and others have seen that, hey, cartels are the enemy. And there's, unfortunately, certainly the state of Texas can only do so much. We can certainly work up to that river, but we depend upon our federal partners in the U.S. government to address, transnational threats. And even though it's transnational, but it impacts Texas. And of course, as you know, the governor and the state legislature and really the people of Texas and the ranchers, they made it very clear. That may not be our job, but it is our job to be proactive in this regard. And Ronnie brings up a great point is that, hey, it's how do you, we're effective can we prioritize going after something? Yes, we can. We can prioritize those gangs, or the principal gangs that are involved in fentanyl distribution. We can certainly do that. And that's the advantage of the Texas Anti-Gang Centers is we have everybody there, all the players. And you got great expertise across all the different disciplines, and there you can target them. And the prosecutor's been very good. The Board of Prosecutors good. It supports the tag in many areas. That's very helpful to have a prosecutor. Our federal partners do it. The U.S. attorneys built into the enterprise investigations and prosecution. So there's some things that collaboratively we can do. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. I think part just obviously Amanda's talked to everybody different times. One of the efforts today is really to kind of get an overview of the different agencies. And, obviously fentanyl has become much more of a crisis in the last year. And so therefore, obviously as the council, and we're moving forward with trying to set up our process on which we can then provide to you how dollars will be distributed across the different health regions of the state of Texas. And those processes, I think, today is kind of accumulation of just comments from different agencies that at least as of, earlier last month, the governor had directed to kind of pull together, and each agency's had conversations together as groups and individuals, as in what are the efforts that can be done either within the domain of that agency, but then also cross-section as a totality, and where are those kind of possible coming together to hopefully, and you mentioned with kids, with 3 teenagers, the tragic story that was kind of high profile here in Austin, a young high school kid overdosing, thinking he's taking it's Xanax, and instead it's fentanyl. And I use that, unfortunately, as an education moment for teenagers.
We've had over 7 UTLs in that situation.
Every week.
Three. I mean, it is awful. And, I had conversations again with kids just last week about this because they have no clue what this is. And it could just be a dare. It could be a bet. It could be something they've never taken anything in their life before, but it looks like candy. It can't be harmless like a Skittle. I think as we hear next from TDCJ, what Jason's going to talk to us next after the Colonel, and then each different agency. I guess what I'm trying to come up with is from your expertise as a council. What are the things that maybe we can do as we set up our process to distribute money, but then also cumulatively, is there recommendations? Again, as Colonel said, he's not the policymaker. I'm not the policymaker, but I know a whole lot of them. And so therefore, what do we target eventually to hopefully improve our success level? So thanks. Anything else you want to add real quick?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you, Colonel. We appreciate your time today. All right. Jason, as you're drinking water, you're coming up next. Yes, sir. All right. Thanks, Colonel. Appreciate it.
Well, I can get up.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. You can go back about your day and accomplish whatever you need to.
Hey,
We appreciate everything you do.
Thank you for your leadership on
Yes,
this.
sir. Yes, sir.
I know it's important to you and sort of the governor and the legislature for thanking us. Yeah.
Appreciate it. You work with Freeman.
Pretty good. So,
Tom's with his wife.
oh, do you?
Yes.
Stan? No, Stan. Yeah.
I'm gonna tell him to sit.
He said the same thing about me.
Trust me, I've heard it from both the, yeah. It's all right. Thanks, Carl. Thanks. Before Jason starts, Ronnie, do you mind, I imagine everybody on the council knows, but, would you explain tag for everybody? real quick?
Yeah.
Just in case, since that acronym was used 2 or 3 times, I just want to make sure everybody understands what that really represents and how law enforcement comes together.
Yes, sir. So, Texas Anti-Gang Unit, what they do is they set up a lot like ERIC, which is our resource intelligence centers. Basically, everyone, local, federal, can come together in one place and set up almost like a major command post. It's nice that you have all these different agencies in one location, and it's heavily, there's plenty of intel analysts and resources that we could use so that everybody can kind of chip in and work a bigger problem together. I think moving forward, when I was looking at and reading some of the proposals from an enforcement standpoint, I do feel like tag offices. There's one in Waco, Houston, Dallas. If we could expand those, as well as get funding to those tag offices, and that's why I asked if we would have to expand their mission to Texas Anti-Gang. So if we have to expand it to attack the fentanyl, then that's where we should put funds, because they have the ability and the resources to be able to distribute money to local municipalities that don't. A lot of the reason these local agencies come to the federal side is because they don't have the fund right. So especially if you're dealing with where we're seeing the fatalities occur is the low end users / dealers. So these are people that are selling three or four pills at a time. And that's where we're seeing these deaths occur. And we're targeting those, of course, but our main business is the ones that are bringing in 50,000 at a time. So in order for local agencies to be able to fund it, they're $15, $30 a pill. And these local agencies don't have those type of funds. They can't afford to buy 10 pills. So I think we set up tag offices that can kind of target any kind of threat for that and dedicate money funds to that kind of investigations. And I think we'll have some type of.
Do they do any prevention or it's all response?
So there is, I mean, just like anything else, they'll have PIOs associated with it that can coordinate that. They'll also reach out to a lot like me where they'll have officers or TFOs or investigators in place that they do that as well. That it's also kind of, so I split my duty between speaking and going through awareness as well as supporting these investigations.
And I just thought it would be helpful because wasn't sure how familiar everybody was with tag and the anti-gang units. And, you know, the fact I was just at one here 2 weeks ago. And so, you know, really what it enables is that I may have resources as an entity that another one doesn't, and vice versa. And the technology that I have and the capability can help respond to that issue. And so therefore having it in one location is pretty critical, and not just responding, but being ahead of the curve on whatever kind of stuff. So anyway, thanks for expanding on that. All right. Okay, so now I'll call on Jason Clark, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, to provide an overview of their actions and efforts to address opioid. Jason, thanks for being here.
Thank you, council members. Appreciate it. It's always tough to follow current patrol, but I'll do my best. My name is Jason Clark. I serve as the Chief of Staff for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And just thank you for allowing me to briefly talk about what TCJ is doing to interrupt the cycle of addiction and help reintegrate men and women back into society. So hopefully they become productive, tax-paying citizens. Also joining me in the audience is Christopher Carter. He's our Director of Rehabilitation Programs. We'll let you have some questions there. If you'll allow me, Comptroller, I just want to give a quick primer on.
I don't think someone's talking to you.
I'm sorry. Let me just give a quick primer of what TCJ does. So in 1989, we had landmark legislation that essentially consolidated the prison system, parole and probation system under one umbrella. We have almost 30,000 employees across the system. Most deal directly with inmates and parolees each and every day. And I'll tell you, it's one of the most challenging jobs in all of state government. They are dealing with individuals that are convicted of felonies and doing their best to essentially try to get them on the right path and get them hopefully plug back into society. Beyond the parole and correctional side, we have many other functions like victim services, reentry. All are responsible for providing just those necessary functions for us to be successful. Because ultimately, our mission, similar to DPS, is public safety, first and foremost. I'll start on the front end of the system, and that's probation. TDCJ has a division within our agency called CJAD, Community Justice Assistance Division, and we essentially provide the funding and standards and training and the technical assistance to 123 independent community corrections and supervision departments across the state. So the state provides about 60% of that funding. Probationer fees make up the rest, and there's approximately 2,500 probation officers across the state that are operated by local judicial districts. Probation is cost effective, and it's an alternative for some individuals. So the average cost per day for someone on probation is about $4, as opposed to someone that's incarcerated, which is closer to $70. So probation departments really do some heavy lifting when it comes to interrupting the cycle of addiction. They offer specialized caseloads, mental health care, substance use treatment, and even residential facilities. So ultimately, it allows judges some alternate sentencing options for the right individuals, keeping them in the community rather than sending them to prison. The next option for judges is substance abuse felony punishment facilities. These are also known as SAFE-P. So SAFE-P program primarily serves probationers, but it can also be parolees. And most individuals will continue on their level of probation. So it is a 6-month incarcerated program, also followed by 12 months of aftercare. And there's about 2,700 individuals that are inside our system today in SAFE-Ps. The next system is the state jail system, and that was developed in the 1990s. This was before my time, but you'll remember that county jails were filling up, and we had essentially a backlog going on. So the state developed a state jail system, and really to relieve that and help provide some treatment for low-level drug and property crime offenses. And so these are people, they're not county jails, which primarily house misdemeanor or pretrial. These are individuals that are convicted of a state jail felony, which means you can serve up to 2 years, and it's generally day for day. There's just over 2,600 individuals that are in state jail right now. When I started in the system in 2006, we had about 15,000 individuals that were in state jails, and we've seen that number just continue to go down. That's primarily because these individuals are being diverted at a local level through probation. So you have the SAFE and the state jail system that were born in the 1990s. However, the prison system goes back more than 170 years. So sentences range anywhere from 2 years to life to a death sentence. They primarily house violent inmates as well as those of higher level drug and property crimes. Most individuals will get out one day, and most will get out on supervision. And many are required to complete a treatment program before they go home. Our snapshot today is we're almost at 117,000 prison inmates all across the state. On the back end of our system is parole. So TDCJ does not make decisions on who goes home. That's done by a separate agency, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, but we work very closely with them. Our parole division has about 2,000 employees that supervise just over 77,000 individuals. And it's really a critical handoff as people are leaving prison and they re-enter back into society. Our goal is to get them plugged into services that they need and hopefully get them back to work. So how do we measure our success? We measure our success by the rate of individuals coming back to us. We're not looking for repeat customers. We want a one and done, hopefully. The next one, just to give you a quick snapshot of what our population looks like today. Most inmates are male. The racial breakout is pretty even across the system, and the average age is 39. I will tell you that age number is a little bit deceiving because physiologically, people are much older when they're in prison. So I'll say that 39 is probably closer to a 49 individual, simply because they haven't taken care of themselves out in the free world. And when they come to prison, they have many health problems that come along with it. I mentioned most are violent crime. That's about 62% of our inmates are serving for a violent offense. 14%, are serving time for a drug-related offense. So TDCJ is not in the business of just warehousing people. We know that most will re-enter society, and they're going to become your neighbor and my neighbor. So it's important that we offer them the tools in order to be successful as they re-enter society. So with that in mind, re-entry is really first and foremost for everything that we do. So day number one starts re-entry. So as individuals enter our system, they go through a series of screenings to really see what their needs are. We talked about their medical needs, but they may also have educational needs and substance abuse or alcohol needs as well. And so we use a couple of different instruments to kind of gauge what that need is. First is the Texas Christian University Drug Screen, or TCUDS as we call it. It's a self-screening tool. And the second screener is an Addiction Severity Index, or ASI for short. And the results of these instruments allow us to figure out what treatment programs we need to put these individuals in. We talked a minute ago, just 14% are serving time for drug-related offenses, but the majority of our inmates, 55%, are chemically dependent. I know today's focus is on opioids and fentanyl, and so I'm going to get to that in a little bit. We don't specifically break out those that are serving a sentence for opioids. However, there's about 15,000 people in our system today that are convicted of a penalty group 1, which includes opiates and opium derivatives. And remember that screening, we do ask inmates, what's your drug of choice? What we're using in the free world. And so opioids ranks number 5 out of the top 5. The first is marijuana, followed by alcohol, amphetamines, cocaine, and then opioids. So part of running a good correctional system is really limiting the exposure of illegal substances in a correctional system. But I can tell you that when a person is convicted and come to prison, doesn't mean their desire to get drugs stops. And so just like re-entry is 24/7, treatment is 24/7, our ability to stop contraband is 24/7. So how individuals try to beat our security continues to grow in sophistication. I know Colonel McGraw touched a little bit on prison gangs. Certainly we have transnational gangs such as MS-13. We have homegrown gangs such as Aryan Brotherhood. We have MS-13, Texas Syndicate, Mexican Mafia. All have a lot of time on their hands and resources and individuals out in the community that want to get drugs into our system. And so we really have to work very hard to try to beat that. I'll bring your attention to the top right. If you were to zoom out a little bit, you can see that's an actual air compressor. And welded with inside that air compressor is cell phones, drugs, tobacco. And so had we not gotten a tip, we wouldn't have known that that was in there. Bottom right looks like just a traditional greeting card. But in fact, that entire card was dipped in synthetic marijuana. And then underneath the stamp was LSD. And so TDCJ has to use an array of technology and personnel to combat contraband. So this includes comprehensive video surveillance. We use partial scanners, metal detectors, and then soon we're going to be piloting wave millimeter and X-ray machines, similar to what you see at the airport for individuals coming in. Also in late in 21, we, in conjunction with our medical partners, University of Texas Medical Branch, began equipping our mailroom staff and some correctional staff with Narcan. And we've used that 83 times on our staff and inmates. And while the use of fentanyl has really kind of taken hold in the free world, I can tell you in the incarcerated world, we are fortunate we've not yet seen that take hold. However, we are preparing for it. We do random drug tests of inmates. And just to give you an idea, the last quarter we did 17,000 drug tests with a positivity rate of about 3.5%. The drug of what we primarily see is amphetamines in our system. Out of those 17,000 tests, we had 12 that tested positive for opioids. However, much like synthetic marijuana, which is a constantly changing compound, fentanyl is the same way. And so we are trying new ways to make sure that we're testing for it and that we can detect it. I mentioned the mailroom. So we have more than 7 million pieces of mail that come through our mailrooms each day. And as I said, that's one of the areas that they try to beat us. What we are working on right now is deploying secure tablets across the system. So we can essentially get rid of the mail that's coming through. And we think that that's going to have a big impact. We're also going to begin a communications campaign throughout the prison and parole population. We do have now the tablets. We have an inmate-run newspaper. We do have some limited televisions within the system. And so really to get the word out there, how dangerous fentanyl is and how quickly it can kill you. So how does TDCJ impact individuals that are struggling with addiction? So we have more than 12,000 substance use disorder treatment beds across the system. And you can see those that are listed on the screen. And really this level of treatment would not be possible without the legislature. They continue to invest heavily in treatment. Even during bad economic times, they have not cut that in our budget. And we have a base budget somewhere around $340 million that will be invested in treatment. When I came to TCJ in 2006, the prison population was getting critical. So we were beginning to run out of space. And so lawmakers really had a choice in where they wanted to invest their money. Did they want to invest in building new prisons, or did they want to invest in treatment and try to get back to the root cause of what might be going on? So they invested in treatment in 2007, and really fast forward to 2011, we closed our first prison. And today we've closed or idled 15 prisons across the state. And that's a lot to be proud of. We hope we work our way out of a business, but to see the prison population go down, to see people be back in communities is really why we do it. When it comes to probation and parole, I'm just going to highlight a few programs that are really, I think, making a difference. The first is intermediate sanction facilities. So they're better known as ISFs. These are both for parolees and probationers. So you will have times where individuals that get out on probation or parole have relapses. They may have technical violations. They may have things where it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of sending them back to prison. However, we want to get their attention and we want to give them some immediate treatment. And so we will send them to an intermediate sanction facility for up to 180 days where they will receive treatment, both substance use and cognitive treatment. And that's been very successful. The next two programs are specific to opioid use. So in 2018, the agency received a grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance for a comprehensive opioid and stimulant substance use program, long acronym. It's grant funded, and really it's designed for individuals that are in rural areas. And so we've identified those that have a need. And so how do you continue that continuum of care once they get out? And so we've been able to leverage this grant program. It's a 6-month program where individuals are getting both group and individual sessions, and we do that completely virtual. And we have seen some really good success with that. As we looked at the research, it appears, early research, that it's dropped the rearrest rate by 40%. So we're really excited about that program and the individuals that they're serving. The next program is specific to opioid use, and it's a pilot project that's happening in Bexar County with probationers. Health and Human Services partnered with TDCJ to serve individuals diagnosed with opioid use disorder. We were actually able to get a grant, a targeted opioid program grant, which would establish a sustainable treatment utilizing medication-assisted treatment for probationers. So in addition to MATs, they're also offering counseling and peer support services. That's important because these individuals are from Bexar County. And so when they release from that secure correctional facility that's there in Bexar County, the linkage exists when they go back out into the community. And so that's a pilot project that we're going to watch very closely to see hopefully some good results. And that should serve about 120 individuals per year. And that contract was just awarded in August. So we hope to start those services later this year. And then finally, I just want to close out and talk about what we know works. We know that treatment works. So we're a data-driven agency. And again, we talked about what's our measure of success. Our measure of success is keeping people out of prison. And so when you look at a couple of our programs, and we see these numbers across almost every one of our treatment programs, it's less than 20% of individuals that go through them come back to prison. And I can tell you that's a return rate that is lower than almost everyone else in the country. So not only are we stopping that revolving door of individuals coming into the prison system, but we're also helping men and women, moms and dads, brothers and sisters, restore their families and make Texas safe. Cut over, that's all I have.
Thank you, Jason. Anybody got any questions for Jason? The only question I'll have is obviously, that you mentioned, y'all don't see an immediate impact on people, one type of drug abuse use to another. Is there a time period or a frame with a significant type of drug use change in society that ultimately shows up in the prison system as higher? I think if I remember correctly, I thought you said opioid was number 5 or 6 on the list if you had to go down. But is there a timeline that becomes more of a critical issue for y'all?
It is, and you'll typically see a delay in when a drug becomes popular in the free world. So I'll use synthetic marijuana as an example. K2, spice is what they would call it. That seems to be the drug of choice at the moment within the prison system. Partly because it's easier to smuggle in. You can put it on paper, the changes. And so you do see typically a delay from what becomes popular in the free world to what makes its way into the prison system. And so we're really gearing up and checking to see, as fentanyl, and we're seeing it spread across communities, how is it that they are going to try to get it in?
Yeah.
And then how do we test to make sure, are we seeing it or are we just not testing correctly? And so those are areas that we're really going to be focused on. And then part of it too is many of these folks are longtime drug users. These are people that have had years of drug use. And so heroin, for instance, is not big in Texas. And I believe partially, and Mr. Carter might be able to back me up here, but that can be a more dangerous drug sometimes to use. And so I think there is maybe a level of hesitancy of long-time drug users to touch fentanyl simply because of its danger. But we've seen it twice now in our mailrooms over the last year. So I feel like those gangs and others are starting to probe our system to figure out how do we get it in. But we've been fortunate as we look at overdoses. We've had, unfortunately, a couple overdose deaths. Those have not been caused by fentanyl.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation.
Pardon me, this is Catherine Yoder. One of the things that I'm continuously concerned about is that aftercare and the handoffs to the community-based organizations, individuals that have a long time drug use and abuse that have been seeking or getting treatment within the prison systems and what level and coordination with some of the community-based organizations. Could you maybe share a few that you think are successful and, in terms of recommendations for the council, your thought process behind that? Because that is a huge issue for us in terms of Parkland and making sure that, because we see a lot of these folks.
Absolutely. So as we work through the handoff, we have what's called TTC, so Transitional Treatment Center. These are where folks will go for aftercare. We have a couple thousand of those beds that are out there. We also work closely with the local mental health authorities. What we see is oftentimes individuals are newly diagnosed, so they may have a drug addiction, but also they have a mental health disorder as well. And so it's imperative for us to work closely with those individuals. But I'll also raise my hand and say volunteers. State government can only get you so far, but we have more than 24,000 volunteers that come into our system. But there's just as many that are out in the free world that are doing things like NA, AA. And so we are connecting those individuals with groups that are out in the community. And we do that linkage through a number of different ways, giving them materials before they leave, but also continuing, if they're on parole supervision, those linkages and making sure that they happen. But you're absolutely right. That handoff into the community is incredibly important. And you have to make sure that you have partners there that'll work closely with you.
I just have a comment. Thanks for a great presentation. This is Dr. Louise from Tyler. Just a general comment about medication-assisted therapy. I'm sure you all know that in the addiction field now, we want to avoid that term. We're all using medication use for opioid use disorder because the term MAT seems to be stigmatizing. There's no other area of medicine where we use that term. So if we can begin to avoid calling it MAT, MAT is becoming obsolete now. We don't think it's a good term to use.
Okay, thank you.
That's on.
All right.
Jump in.
So yeah, thank you for the presentation. So you talk about two specific pilot projects, and I may have misheard, but it's about parolees and people who are on probation currently. Are there any of these substance use treatment programs available to one, people that are currently incarcerated? That's kind of part one of the question. Part two is, do you see being able to provide those types of services as being substantially different in prisons versus the other types of jails that you mentioned? Because one is for more short term, one is for more long term.
Yeah, so we do, on the incarcerated side, we have more than 12,000 specific beds that are for individuals. And really, it depends upon their needs. So we may have someone that just have a little bit of drug use. And so we would potentially use a cognitive type treatment program as opposed to a more in-depth modality. So absolutely, we have those. State jails is a good example, right? So those individuals will probably serve less than a year. And so we really have to get in and start that treatment quick. And so those are 60 and 90-day programs that can be extended out. And so it really kind of depends on the setting in which you're coming into the system on what program that we're going to use. Do those look different than what is in the free world? Absolutely. When you are out, you're trying to get a job, you've got a lot of other responsibilities. And so we have to work with individuals that are on supervision to make sure that we can provide them the treatment, but do so in such a way that they can reintegrate back into society.
So when you say different settings, do you mean like different geographic locations in the state, or do you mean different types of jail site prisons? Because I'm trying to wonder, or I guess I'm trying to ask is, how universal are these programs within the state jail system? Are there areas where they're more prevalent or less prevalent?
So we have them at essentially all state jails, but the prison system. But part of what we do is we will transfer folks to those programs. And so not every penitentiary will have a substance use program. And so we may have to move someone as they're preparing to go out across the state to ensure that they get into that particular program. So it can be geography based, but fortunately we do have the ability to move them. One area that we are looking, because we do face some challenges related to finding counseling staff and others, is remote programming. So we've been fortunate that we're starting to expand broadband, because many of our facilities are pretty rural. So how do we leverage technology to get and treat people that may be in a place that we can't hire a LCDC? And so those are areas that we're really looking to leverage technology.
Great.
Thank you, Dr.
Dr. Willis, thank you for being here. See.
I just have one other question for him. I just following up on what Catherine asked about, in the literature, we see a lot of very high mortality or overdose death following being released from the criminal justice system. Are we able to follow up people living the criminal justice system in terms of outcome of overdose that they might suffer from because they lose tolerance and they can't get back to treatment? Are we able to follow people through being released from jail?
Yes, I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I'll certainly get back to you. We do track that. But again, I think we don't see a significant amount of individuals that are on parole necessarily relapsing and dying because of drug use. We're fortunate in that respect because they are subject to drug testing. And so hopefully we can intervene whenever they're beginning to have relapses and plug them back into services.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jason? All right. Thank you. Appreciate both of y'all being here. All right, so next, we're gonna move on to Health and Human Service Commissions. And Ms. Gaines, good to see you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Being patient.
Oh, no worries.
But it's like a prelude to session.
I know, but you are a very friendly group, so we're excited to be here. And thank you for the invitation. So happy to have the opportunity to share with you a number of the resources that we have available through the Health and Human Services Commission. For those of you that have never met me, I'm Sonia Gaines. I'm the Deputy Executive Commissioner for Behavioral Health Services at the Health and Human Services Commission. And we provide a number of community-based services through many providers.
I can say I've been real bad about this. I'm trying to get better, and I didn't do it before you started. Page 50, if you're looking in your presentation book. So I swore I was going to get better, and I'll let you start. So I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. And I'm probably going to upset your presentation
That's okay.
in the sense of, being mindful of the topic at hand, talking about fentanyl and opioid addiction. We have a number of services and programs that I think have a positive impact on that. And I have brought along with me a number of experts from our center. I think originally we were going to give a comprehensive discussion around substance use services. And so what I'd like to do is really start out with just some general conversations about, our substance use services, which actually start on page 25 in terms of your slides. And I'm not really going to use the slides. So I'm going to really just talk with you for a moment. Okay? And then I want to let you know the people that I have in the room. I have Philander Moore. He is our statewide coordinator. And so opioid coordinator. So we're really fortunate in Texas that we have the statewide coordinator. And then we have Dr. Harvey, who is our our mental health coordinator, statewide coordinator. She works with 20 plus agencies in the state. That position was developed to have better coordination across the state in terms of mental health, and I would say substance use as well. And then we have Casey Stray, who is the director over our TTOR program, which is 100% focused on opioid. And she's going to share with you some of the initiatives that we worked on there. And then we have Trina Ida, who is our associate commissioner over mental health and substance use services. And so you see, we have quite a bit, right? Quite a bit to share with you. And I will tell you just in general in terms of substance use services, and set aside the opioid program, but we get a little over $300 million in terms of just general substance use services that include prevention, intervention, treatment, and some recovery services. And I looked at most of your resumes, so I know that you know what those services entail, and most of those services are provided through a little over 500 different providers across the state. We work with some LMHAs, some private substance use providers. We also work with several universities that have done a phenomenal job for us. So we've been very pleased. We also, in the recovery space, we have an extensive program in terms of adult recovery services, working with people that have lived experiences. We have substance use recovery housing that's available across the state. And then the team is going to share with you some of the other details. When it comes to the opioid space, we get a little over $100 million. Now, one of the things I want to share with you is that about 70% of the funding that we get really comes from the federal government. And that's a little bit different than what we see on our mental health side. And so we've been very fortunate that we've been the recipient. We get the second largest amount of funding in the nation when it comes to the opioid program that Casey's going to share with you. And we're really pleased at how well that program's been implemented. But I will tell you, that fentanyl has changed the game. We were in a really good space here in Texas, and then the whole movement around fentanyl occurred, and I think we're all seeing such negative impact across the whole state. So our staff are going to share with you some of the things that we're doing. I do want to mention that we have a couple of campaigns that we've been working on. Very extensive campaigns that have been required by the federal government. And so to answer your question, that's one of the things, the governor has really put a focus on fentanyl. We've been working with our communications office as well as the governor's office and some other entities to get the word out in terms of, the services and the resources that are going to be available. And so I will tell you, there's one area. I'll actually come back later after Casey talks and tell you more about some of the specific resources that we have developed around fentanyl. And so first, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Harvey.
Okay. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Deputy Executive Commissioner Gaines. I have the privilege, some people might say it is a punishment, to serve in a position that my boss first held. She transitioned to working in state government, and not only her, but the wonderful person sitting next to her, Trina Ita. And so they've left very big shoes for me to fill, but I need things head on. And so I'm here to talk with you all about the Statewide Behavioral Health Coordinating Council. The Statewide Behavioral Health Coordinating Council was commissioned by the 84 Texas legislature. And the intent for creating the Statewide Behavioral Health Coordinating Council was to develop a statewide and strategic approach to the delivery of behavioral health services. They were looking for a mechanism to work to maximize the use of general revenue funds that were being allocated to state agencies, really wanting the state agencies to come together, better collaborate, reduce duplication of effort, again, all with the intention of maximizing resources and I think ultimately improving the care that we provide to the Texans that we are entrusted to serve. There are, as Sonia mentioned, 20 plus organizations serving on the Statewide Behavioral Health Coordinating Council, and that includes all of the state agencies that you have heard from today, with the exception of the Department of Public Safety. And I was nerding out a bit listening to TDCJ's presentation because I am an old probation officer, adult probation officer, and provided mental health care through one of their community programs through the Texas Correctional Office on Offenders with Medical or Mental Impairments. So I am not just one of those people that comes to work for the state and, they tell you to play nice in the sandbox and we do it. I've seen the impact of the services that are provided through the local mental health authorities and other providers in the community to clients' lives. So we are responsible, we being the Statewide Behavioral Health Coordinating Council, for several deliverables, the core of which include publishing a 5-year behavioral health strategic plan. Annually, we are to publish a progress report that tells the story on how we are advancing with implementation of the strategic plan. And then annually, we also publish a coordinated expenditure proposal. So there is a report that is done every 2 years that tells a comprehensive story about the funding that state agencies are being allocated for behavioral health services. And then annually, we publish a report on those expenditures. You all are probably most familiar with the Behavioral Health Strategic Plan. The 87th legislature did something that I am very excited about. They directed the Statewide Behavioral Health Coordinating Council to publish a sub-plan of that behavioral health strategic plan that is focused on substance use disorder services. So I think a lot of people will say, well, weren't you already doing that? The behavioral health encompasses mental health and substance use disorder services. But I think it's fair to say that the majority of the people serving on the coordinating council really do have a mental health focus. And to some of the issues that Sonia referenced earlier in terms of financing, in terms of types of services, in terms of a provider network, really does look different in substance use services than it does for mental health. And so I'm very excited to say that we will have a sub-plan for substance use disorder services that is going to be published within the next month, along with our second iteration of the 5-year behavioral health strategic plan. So at this time, that concludes my presentations. Would you all like to hold questions until we've all?
If anybody has any questions specifically. And if we have some come back up, we'll ask them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hearing that, I'm going to turn it over to Philander Moore.
Okay.
He's my team member that serves as the statewide opioid coordinator.
Thank you.
Good morning. As Dr. Harvey mentioned, my name is Philander Moore. I'm the statewide opioid coordinator at HHSC. That's a position that was funded primarily through the SOAR grant several years ago. I'm an old head kind of when it comes to having worked at the state. I kind of retired and came back to work. But while I was there, I served as the director, we call it that, the substance use implementation services statewide. So I have a lot of knowledge around substance use in addition to opioids. The position, however, that was funded through the SOAR grant as statewide opioid coordinator allows me an opportunity to kind of serve in a role that help us make sure that funding that is coming into the state, the services that are being provided are not duplicated. And in addition to the services that are being provided through TTOR, as Casey will talk about in a little bit, I work with agencies that are receiving dollars from federal agencies like HRSA, which is the Health Resource Service Administration, BJA, which is Bureau of Justice and Justice Division, and CDC, and a number of others, in addition to looking at funding that's being, hopefully will be provided through the settlement funds that are coming from the Abatement Council out into the field. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is that I'm trying to work real close with the Abatement Council. I've already talked with Dr. Mills and I've talked to Dr. Holloman numerous times, and I have a kind of a relationship with Dr. Holloman. We've been working together for a long time. But it's to make sure that they know kind of what we're doing. And those agencies that I'm working with, right now there's about 13 agencies that I have what's called a network with, where I make sure that they know what we're doing. I kind of know what they're doing in relationships to the services that they're providing through those funds that they're getting, so that we don't end up doing a lot of duplication of efforts as it relates to those services. Clearly, HRSA, one of the things that HRSA does, one of the 3 of the programs that I work with, are getting dollars from HRSA to address services in the rural areas, which is one of those things that we don't do a lot of, because for a number of reasons, as they mentioned earlier, just don't have LCDCs in those areas and professionals to work there. So that's one of the other things that I kind of do. The other thing that I did when I came to work in this role is I created a network of statewide opioid coordinators from around the nation. And we have a quarterly meeting, and we address issues and we talk about issues relating to opioids in their states. And in a lot of ways, we can utilize the things that we each are doing to support one another. So that turns out to be a really good thing for us in terms of providing technical assistance to one another and providing some assistance to one another as it relates to that. Also, in addition to what statewide opioid coordination does, there's an evaluator. I'm thinking that Casey might mention this when she's doing the talk, but there's an evaluator that's also attached to the statewide opioid coordination area. Her name is Danielle Hodgson, and she focuses primarily on the data that comes in and making sure that those programs that are within TTOR are addressing the goals and objectives that they are stated to do. She does a pretty thorough evaluation of those services through the data that are received from those providers that are getting funds to address the prevention, treatment, recovery, and integrated services. So that's another huge role that we do. Although we're not attached directly to the VA staff, we are actually housed over in OMAC under Dr. Harvey. We work extremely close with the staff from the TTOR to make sure that we're addressing issues related to the opioid crisis. And that's pretty much all I'll mention right now. I think as we go forward, if there's a question that you guys want to ask, I'll be open to send it out. But yeah. Hi, Dr. Mills.
Well, the Americans with Disabilities Act covers people who are in opioid treatment programs. So this is federal policy. And I used to be the medical director for the Midland County Jail. So medical director for Tarrant County Jails for almost 10 years. And I can see where Tarrant County or Dallas County or Harris County, they could handle this. I have no idea how Limestone County would handle this when they only got 2 LVNs 5 days a week. And so I'm just curious, are we developing any kind of policy to address this Americans with Disability Act in our very rural counties? Because they just don't have the resources to do this. They don't have the resources to comply with federal law.
Is that a question? Was that a question or?
Well, I'm asking. Are we doing anything, at your level to help these counties address these issues?
Well, I think maybe Casey can address that when she comes up because she works a bit more than us.
Yeah, I would follow up with very similar to my questioning. You mentioned you all have some rural deficits. You're not able to serve rural areas. You say that's not really what we do as much. Is it lack of personnel only, or is that the main driver? Is the lack of personnel, or are there other reasons why we're not able to provide services? Is it a demand issue or a supply issue, or?
Well,
So I think that it might help if Casey does her presentation, but she'll talk specifically about, the opioid resources. I will tell you that, workforce and the availability of substance use providers has been a challenge for us, not just now, but historically. But we'll tell you about some of the initiatives that we've been working on. So I think it'd be good later if we let Casey do her presentation.
okay.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Casey Strine, the director of the Texas Targeted Opioid Response. We lovingly refer to it as TTOR all the time. So if you hear that, that is what we mean. I am starting, there's a slide deck. I can't tell what number it is, but slide 9 is the beginning. So that Gaines talked about some opioid campaigns that we have in process that are federally mandated, also legislatively mandated as of the last couple sessions ago. And we really wanted to make sure that a campaign like this really speaks to Texans. Is it what they want to hear? Is it going to be a message that is meaningful to them? And so part of that means that we were doing some formative research to really inform the development of those messages. And from that, we learned after a survey of a couple thousand Texans that 1 in 4 Texas residents has reported experiencing an opioid overdose or knows someone who has. So it's much more prevalent than we think it is or that we hear about in the numbers. So to address this epidemic, Texas Health and Human Services Commission started TTOR in May 2017 with federal grants, which Debt Gaines covered, from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We are a public health initiative with the mission to save lives and provide lifelong support to Texans with opioid and stimulant use disorders by expanding access to services and reducing opioid overdose deaths. We serve the entire state, but we also have a particular focus on 3 groups at increased risk for opioid use disorder, harmful stimulant use, and their resulting consequences. So these are our priority populations. People living in rural, remote areas, people using multiple substances, and people with historically low access to services. So we serve everybody, but when we have the opportunity, we hone in on those 3 areas. So the next slide really talks about the history of the TTOR program and kind of our funding streams over the years. What's missing here is the bar for SOAR 22, which is our continuation of funding, which was just recently awarded a couple weeks ago. That will take us through fiscal year 2024. So in order to, let me back up and say that most of these grants are 2-year terms, and SAMHSA has requirements usually to get the funds out into the community within 3 months of award. So really fast implementation with a very short amount of time. So one of the ways that we try to do this and get the funds out into the community is to leverage existing contracts that we have in our system, but also to partner with governmental entities like county governments, other state agencies, as you heard TDCJ talk about one of our initiatives, and the academic institutions and the local mental and behavioral health authorities, usually because we can do that through direct contract. TTOR also supports independent evaluation, as Philander was speaking on. We, really believe in the accountability aspect. We want transparency and accountability to these dollars. They're taxpayer dollars. Everybody wants to know, is what you're doing working? And so we invested to have that evaluation piece in our programming so that we can clearly say, yes or no, this is working. At the current moment, we have about 50 active contracts under these funds, and some of those are partially funded by the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment Block Grant, either in whole or in part. So the next slide is our continuum of care, and this is where we sort of illustrate how we set up our programming. So we have 4 broad strategies that are employed to address opioid misuse, and they are prevention, integrated, treatment, and recovery. And each strategy supports evidence-based services that increase access to medications for opioid use disorder and reduce opioid-related overdose deaths. At the high level, prevention projects connect communities to resources that throughout Texas, raising awareness about prescription opioid misuse, distributing life-saving naloxone, and stopping substance use before it starts. Integrated projects work with organizations that provide rapid, short-term services to people with opioid use disorder, and then arrange longer-term care through other more specialized providers. So in that category, think more like crisis care, emergency response. It's the healthcare community. We often are starting to call them non-traditional partners because there's always been this divide between behavioral health and physical health. And so we have hospitals now coming on and doing broad swaths of screenings for opioid use disorder and helping connect inpatients into the community to get services and other examples like that. When Debt Gangs comes up and talks about some of our fentanyl programming, this integrated section is where you will see some of our programs who are really day-to-day interfacing with what's going on in our fentanyl experience. Treatment projects expand access to organizations that provide medications for opioid use disorder, ensuring individuals can choose from a variety of treatment options. In TTOR specifically, we only offer mood. We only offer the evidence-based, the 3 medications of methadone, buprenorphine, and extended release injectable naltrexone. That is mandated in our grant language, but we also want to do what is the most effective for Texans. Being that we do still have the opportunity through other grant funds to allow people to engage in withdrawal management services. Choice is important to people. We don't want to stop them on their path to recovery. Where we can, we want to incentivize, people coming into that mood for services. Those who go through withdrawal management are more likely to overdose, more likely to have a recurrence of use. So we really want to kind of focus on what is working in the literature, what really is the most effective. Also, as you have folks coming in, important to note about Texas, if you are reading literature, national literature, you're going to see that most of the states use buprenorphine really broadly. Most of their system is buprenorphine. It is a lower threshold sort of treatment plan. It's really great. There are some consequences coming out of that, which are the prescribing physician is not necessarily building a relationship with the pharmacist. And so then the patient shows up to the pharmacy and they don't have the medication, they haven't done the anti-stigma work, the pharmacy is not ready for that interaction. So that would be something to really pay attention to. The other piece here is that in Texas, we are mostly a methadone focused client population. And the majority of people in Texas pay out of pocket. They don't access third-party payers or other sources. And these funds that I'm talking about are actually payer of last resort. So we're not Medicaid, Medicare, we're not anything other than you have absolutely no resource left to you, and we have the ability to step in and cover that cost. Finally, recovery projects provide peer support, employment, housing, and other services important for sustaining long-term recovery from OUD. So I am not going to go through these next several slides. What you have here are the 25 projects funded under TTOR that are situated across the continuum that we just went through. There are links so that you can look into those projects whenever a link is available, and we are certainly happy to delve deeper into any individual project that you would like to know more about. Again, any project that has a fentanyl focus will be covered by Debt Gains here in a little bit. So I'm going to jump to the map. So here's where you see us diving into sort of those evaluation components and how do we keep accountable to Texans. Right here is a map of TTOR services. So where are we located? And this is a map as of June 2021. The circles are our integrated projects, the squares are recovery, and the triangles are treatment. The entire map is gray because our services for prevention are statewide, so we're just kind of signaling prevention's everywhere. Again, you can find more information about each of those services here in the previous slides that outline each project. So going a little bit deeper to our services map is the next slide, which is asking ourselves, where we have services, are we actually meeting the highest need possible? So this map shows the number of people served by county using dot density, and the placement is random throughout the county, and each dot represents 10 people served by TTOR. The counties are also filled in with blue, white, and gray colors, indicating the number of accidental opioid-related deaths in 2019. So the gray counties are actually suppressed data, means only between 1 and 9 deaths were recorded in that year, and the white counties are no reported overdoses in that county. So you can see us asking ourselves, where people are overdosing and dying, where the problem is most acute, where are our services and where are the gaps in those services that we can move into those areas when we feel that, or when we learn that there's capacity. All right, the next slide. Again, more evaluation. Do we lose? It's a red slide. We don't have it. Oh, you don't have it? Okay. Well, then I will explain this. So we continue to ask ourselves further. We have these two overarching questions, which are we increasing access to mood, and are we reducing overdose deaths? So in terms of increasing access to mood, our evaluator did a drive time analysis using our fiscal 21 data and actually proved that prior to TTOR, only 50% of Texans lived within 30 minutes of their service provider. As of FY21, 76% of Texans live within 30 minutes of their treatment provider. Texas is huge. So of course, now we have a baseline and we can say, how do we get that to 20 minutes? How do we get closer to 100%? What are those things? And I feel like one of the things that's going to pop up here consistently is going to be broadband access, because telehealth is important. It is how we're going to bridge the gap into rural communities. All right, so then we can go to outcomes. These are our all-time outcomes up through fiscal year 2021. Obviously, we've just closed fiscal year 2022, so we have to do actual closeout procedures and clean up the data before we can start reporting out on it. But in terms of reducing overdose deaths, we expect that number to be over 7,000 lives saved through 2022, all time. So this is in direct result of the naloxone distribution, the education efforts, and the reporting structures that we're building. The bottom part, that bar graph there, is again us asking about increased access to MAT. So of those folks who have opioid use disorder who are coming into our funded treatment services, how many of those are going into evidence-based mood? Well, prior to TTOR, it was only about 32%. And as of FY21, we're at 71%. So we have a greater number of people accessing the most effective treatment forms, which ensures longer-term recovery and greater health benefits to them. In the middle there, we're looking at our recovery programming. You know, how many how many people have been introduced to mood services through their recovery coach? Because we know that relationships is really important. And we do have folks who've gone into recovery through their withdrawal management services and then have engaged with our coach. And then they're saying, you know, hey, I'm really struggling. I don't know that this is really working for me. And the coach can then intervene and say, you know what really works is mood. Let me make you an appointment. Let me drive you there. And as a result of that, we've had over 1,000 Texans enter mood through the relationship with their recovery coach. And additionally, you see our non-traditional, traditional healthcare service settings where folks are getting introduced to mood, and that number was over 1,300. And the next slide is really just kind of a repeat of the previous, which I don't think is in here, but it's just our FY21 outcomes, which I'm happy to share if you want to see it. But it's just talking about in FY21, we distributed over 72,000 units of naloxone, and over 25 million people. We had 25 million impressions, or 25 million times a Texan saw the opioid campaign, and over 2,000 people in our direct recovery support services. That is all that I have for you.
All right, series of questions.
Yes.
Are you having trouble obtaining naloxone?
Having trouble. So we did last year. There was a supply issue at the manufacturer level or the distributor level or something like that. We also had made a decision to diversify our stock. So Narcan itself, the nasal injector or nasal spray, is a more expensive unit. At the time, it was about $75 a dose at our public health cost. And so there's intramuscular naloxone, which can be as low as $1 a dose. And so what we did to keep the supply level, but also, balance our books a little bit with all these grant changes, you can see the funding changes over time, was to diversify that stock to keep the same level with less money. What happened is that intramuscular naloxone got caught up in a supply chain issue. So that was the trouble that we were having. This year, the nasal naloxone, the public health price has dropped to about $45. So those dollars are going to go further. And we are also going to continue to invest in the intramuscular naloxone because there are folks in the community who are very comfortable using injection, diabetics, EMS, all of that. So let's take advantage of this affordable cost. So that's where we are.
The other question again refers back to these rural jails. What are we doing to help them out? I mean, I'm just saying some of these jails. I mean, there are 20 jails in Texas that are on probationary status, and so they just don't have a lot of resources.
Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't say that we necessarily have a jail-based focused. We work with TDCJ. That those programs were covered, but we do have what we're considering or what we're calling the ICON project, which is our attempt to try and get into the most rural communities. These are the integrated community opioid networks, where we want to put a peer navigator of sorts out into the community physically, who knows about all of the local resources, the food bank, the churches, anybody who has a vested interest in the health of their citizens. And then also draw in where the gaps are, these telehealth services that we are paying for, so that in hope that there is going to be this sort of net that is cast over the rural community where they can, really take that role and serve their community there.
Casey, I love so much that's going on. Clearly, there's been this wonderful systemic view. So I really appreciate your presentation, your team. Beyond description. My biggest concern is that during the pandemic, the workforce for harm reduction folks have been decimated. I mean, by overdose, by burnout, by feeling fed up. Also, there's this shift of those folks to this sort of advocacy, militant model of we need to fight for what we get, because if we don't, we're not going to get it. And so I love the idea of disseminating services, but I wonder what your ideas are for sort of building those systems like workforce development and training. And maybe, we talked last time about maybe, undermining the cost of getting people trained for LCDCs and those kind of things. Are those part of the discussion?
I think that is a great question and something that we need to consider. Yes. I mean, we do offer staff competency trainings. We try to ensure that everybody that is in the field is trained to the highest level and the highest standard as possible. But yes, we are seeing recruitment and retention strategies. The cost of living is quite high, and services have never really paid people a good wage, just to be frank.
Thank you.
I have a few questions, if you don't mind. I'm Catherine Yoder, and appreciate again all the work that y'all are doing over at HHSC. In terms of the priority populations, is that something that was just HHSC policy, or was that state or federal law in terms of how to distribute the grants?
So these 3 priority populations are specific to TTOR. We used evaluation and surveillance data to set where we were going in the next couple of years. The block grant itself, which we are sort of under the umbrella of, has its priority populations, which we fold into very, very seamlessly. And then I think our leaders here can speak to what policy is set in priority populations.
And on top of that, I don't think that's in the notes, but so if you don't mind sharing that with the actual more description of that. And I will tell you that I think that the work that y'all are doing is so critical to figuring out where we are going to go in terms of grant funding. This is why I'm asking all these questions. So in terms, and again, what you've sent us, I see that you gave us a list of all the awardees. In those descriptions in the websites, does it talk about how much you have given over the years, how often they're reprocured, or new grants going in, how long they've been doing it, other opportunities on that? Is there anything on the horizon for new abilities, things like that? Because I think that's really going to be key for us in terms of what we decide to do going forward.
Yes, so these links are specifically to their project page. So you will see links to where they're serving, not necessarily a fiscal history. We're working on we usually publish a primer and we're just getting it updated. We don't typically tackle long-standing fiscal, but I think we could probably figure something out to help you guys.
And are they? I know that they're multi-year grants because I know that some of our folks in Dallas County have tried to apply. How often are they? How long are they? And are you anticipating doing more in the future? I know that obviously there's time limits in terms of the federal funding, but federal funding keeps coming in on this.
Yes. So it depends on which sort of structure we're leveraging. If you're talking about moved services, those are on a request for application schedule, which is about a 5-year cycle. And I think we're in the 3rd year of that cycle. So as things roll, we try to keep some consistency across the field. And then if more funds come in, it's usually a mad, where are we going to put these funds and what are we going to do? So pre-planning ahead of time and making those investments where we need the funds.
I want to thank you for a great presentation, and I like some of your slides really very well, very informative. Thank you. But just looking at slide number 23, the one that showed the respective regions and the degree of overdose, I just want to be sure I understand that slide very well. I see that on the column for accidental overdose deaths, there's the column for suppressed all over the map. What does suppressed really mean? What are you trying to capture here?
So these are data from the Department of State Health Services. So they're suppressed because if we were to release where those were, it would basically tell people in that community who it was that overdosed. So they're suppressing it for their confidentiality.
Okay. So we don't know how bad it is in those communities, or?
We know that it could be as high as 9 overdoses reported in that county if it is gray, but it could be as low as 1.
Okay.
Hi, this is Pedro Fernandez. I just have a few questions. One, I just want to comment. It was really wonderful to see you demonstrate the continuum of care approach, especially looking at integration in non-traditional settings. I think a lot of initiatives, unfortunately, don't look into those settings. Speaking just as a psychiatrist, especially doing behavioral health, because the bulk of behavioral health in the country oftentimes are occurring in primary care settings. and not in specialized behavioral health clinics. With that said, you mentioned partnering with hospitals. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about that. Is it primarily acute services in hospitals, or are you also working with primary care centers or community centers where a part of this actually goes into the continuum of care, preventative care area?
Yes. So if you're familiar with the Texas Shout program out of Dell Medical School, we have taken their model or worked with them, and they've used their model to expand to other hospitals. And it is in a primary or in an inpatient setting. So it's not in acute care. It's actually as folks are coming in for probably related like oh my gosh, I'm just going to botch it. But, I'm not a doctor. Endocardite, no, I'm not going to get it. You got it. So I just played one on TV. So they're coming in for somewhat related issues, but everybody's getting screened using, either the COWS measure or some sort of screening tool. And if they are reaching that threshold, this team at the hospital activates. Sometimes it's a recovery coach. Sometimes it's the chaplain, it's the social worker, whoever, whatever this team is comprised of, will then go and visit that person and really explore what's going on. One of the things that I like too is that, as I know for sure at the Dell Med Hospital, that they are actually helping to enroll people into Austin related insurance. So if they meet qualifications, now they've been put onto MAP, and then they've got their appointment scheduled and they know where to go as soon as they're discharged from the hospital. Another great partner in this work that works with the Texas Shout team is up in the Fort Worth area, and I'm totally gonna misremember their name too, but it should be in their information. But they are now screening every single person who comes into the hospital. And so we are seeing huge numbers out of that program because they've been able to really build it into the infrastructure of their hospital system.
Sanjay, very good presentation. Why just hospital system or certain hospital system instead of that? Why can we open it up to community pediatricians and community physicians also? I think what we were talking about is if we involve, like we are trying to attack people who are bringing the drugs and treating people who are affected, but if you want to prevent this and lower the demand of this drug, then probably we have to go to where we can change rates.
Yeah.
We need to collaborate with schools and.
Yeah, we have that. You'll see in our intervention projects. And I think TEA, when they present, they'll talk about some of the projects there that we have in the schools. We're really excited about this PACS Good Behavior game, which is a really simple implementation in the schools. The teacher just does it, basically playing a game while they're doing their math drills. And the outcomes for opioid reductions are wonderful. It is a very old and well-established project, and the outcomes are actually shared for multiple risk factors. So like violence and academics and all kinds of things. It just happens that it also works for reducing opioid misuse.
Hi, Carrie, I appreciate everything. I had a few questions to clarify. So I think I understood that you said that methadone was the greater treatment modality we're using in Texas as Suboxone. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, methadone is the most widely used treatment modality in Texas as opposed to buprenorphine products, which is what you will see in other states. So they're really battling, how do we make sure that when patients show up to get their medication that they're getting it? And that's not our issue. Our issue is that, most of our folks are on methadone. Specifically for the fentanyl crisis, what we've been hearing from our providers anecdotally is that those who've been on buprenorphine or those that are coming in, they're finding that the buprenorphine is not effective enough. And so they have to move them to methadone to be effective against the fentanyl. And that most of their patients are surprised to even find out that what they were taking had fentanyl in it in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why I had the question. I think that's interesting because I don't feel like that is from the data I've seen in emergency medicine. the case that Suboxone isn't it feels like we're a little bit behind in our treatment, and that most people who live in areas like I do in Frisco and Collin County, if you talk about methadone, I don't think we're going to be very effective of getting them in. And there's a lot of lack of resources going, I think, to the emergency departments and getting to these people who are potentially great people to be on Suboxone, which is actually pretty effective treatment if managed correctly. But I think we have there's very few providers that are in Texas that are actually have their X waiver, if you really look at it, and who are able to manage these people. So it seems like there's a big opportunity there. I mean, methadone's kind of, an old modality, and in my opinion, something that we're not going to impact as many lives with. So it seems like that is an opportunity for us to look at as to why there's such a barrier to Suboxone therapy. And then the other question I had was related to the naloxone. Am I understanding that seems to be one of the most effective components of what y'all believe is preventing overdose deaths?
I'm sorry, I think I missed the question.
For naloxone, you believe that's the more, like, it's been the most effective? That's the where we're seeing the biggest impact is the availability of naloxone?
We really believe in the entire continuum. You really don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one. It has to be a full hands, all across the continuum approach. You need to be primary. You need to get upstream. You need to prevent teach folks how to handle that trauma and whatever else is going on in their life that is leading to substance use later on. Help them have those skills to effectively manage that, so that they don't have to feel like, all right, substance use is where I'm going. And then later you want to intervene in that crisis spot. And that is where we see naloxone working, as well as some of these intervention programs. We do have one pre-arrest diversion drop-in center in the Houston area. And it's another really great place to talk about, diverting from the law enforcement and criminal justice system. So lots of things work. Yes.
The barriers, do you find that there's a barrier to accessing? Do you feel like there's potentially some people being missed in these programs in terms of, are we focused? Because I know that Parkland has programs and John Peter Smith has programs up this way, but do you feel like certain areas of, like, perhaps are higher functioning users, the lawyers, the functioning moms in society that are hooked on these narcotics are potentially being missed in any of these programs? Do you feel like they're well represented?
I don't know that I can speak to that. I'd have to look at the data and see what even is available to us. We're just here to help everybody as best as we can with the resources that we have. And unfortunately, in some cases, those are limited. And I think to the gentleman's point earlier, why aren't we in primary care and offering this? I mean, that's a resource limitation.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I guess a great point to make before my question. So a lot of the funding is either from the legislature or for the TTOR programs, SAMHSA. What are the gaps that you see that we could potentially fill as a council to aid, or I guess assist or build on what is needed that maybe SAMHSA can't cover, or other funding agencies that you currently have? Where can we supplement or add on or build to?
I feel like that's a lot of responsibility.
You can pass that question to the next meeting.
I feel like it's to our Texas communities to decide. And if they believe in these projects and they think that these work, they will come to you and they will say, we want more funds to do this and take it further. And we want to support them to do that.
Can I ask one more related question? That is, I know the TTOR money has come out like floods, and a lot of the programs really rely on the administrators to decide what's working and what's not. That the folks that are overseeing them sometimes don't have the expectations of evaluation that I might have for my program. And so I like thinking about universal digital platforms and things like that, such that everybody is plugging in, such that there's not just, oh, these agencies need naloxone, but this agency is this many workers, serves this many people, and is near this many hotspots zip code wise, therefore needs this many boxes. And I think that specificity hasn't happened yet. So I'm curious if you think about things like that for improving services and value.
We are, and actually SAMHSA is as well. So recently, and I'm not going to remember who published it, but out of another state, there was published basically a saturation formula for naloxone distribution. And SAMHSA specifically put it, you can go out and look at our funding opportunity announcement. States will develop a saturation plan based on these metrics. And so we are doing that, and we're working on where is the most need so that we can target those resources year over year so that we can reach full saturation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I've been involved in correctional healthcare for 25 years, and I can tell you that most of the withdrawals that I've encountered in my life have been in major jails like Fort Worth and Dallas. I mean, they have whole crews of nurses monitoring these people because opioid use is highly interconnected with being arrested. And I think the tragedy I see in healthcare is that the jails in Texas have become the cutting edge of mental health. And that's not a good place. That's not the best place, I'd say, to get your mental health care. The other kind of connection with Dr. Moore's comments, it's much easier as a physician to get credentialed to prescribe Suboxone than it is methadone. Methadone is black box warning for maintenance unless you're pregnant. And I think the state needs to move more in that direction and move away from methadone, and because it's just much easier on the physician population to get credentialed to use Suboxone, and we ought to be subsidizing our physicians in the state to get that credential.
And more patient-friendly option, moving away from methadone.
Although, can I just say that when I visited methadone clinics, they have more groups, counselor connections, outreach than, Suboxone. The danger is you've got a doctor prescribing it and there's no sort of holding environment. So I think maybe I think that's part of the reason why methadone has had more success in at least the places that I've seen, is that the connections and the community and that holding environment is there. So maybe we do a combination of sort of enhancing the Suboxone availability and training and everything like that, but talk about those MARA groups and communities that really, and peers that allow that to happen. I agree with that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're looking at a buprenorphine and the extended release naltrexone programming, you really want to think about your medical home setup. Because you do want to come in on the back end of that with some therapy and some holistic supports. I will say that as we have worked to expand our buprenorphine programming, one of the things that we were hearing from data wave physicians was that they really weren't familiar with the back end processes of what it means to treat substance use disorder and do the paperwork and all the workflow changes and all that good stuff. So Department of State Health Services at the time had the grant, so they kicked off what used to be called Text Mood, and so they established these echoes, and so it is where primary care and other docs can call in and really do this case management together, and they can do a didactic and then really talk about, okay, here's a challenging patient that I'm seeing. What do you guys do when you see this? And I think they actually had one a few months ago on fentanyl specifically, where they were having to make some really challenging decisions about that person's healthcare plan.
I have a question. Denise Wilkes, I'm tagging on to your statement, and I completely agree that physicians, it's very easy to get your X waiver. I think what keeps many physicians from getting it is the lack of the spectrum. So I would think that employing something like telehealth and connecting to these programs for the spectrum, if that's possible, would not only prevents many more physicians to at least prescribe the medication, but to have that be an effective treatment instead of, I know I've gone through the training actually, but I didn't finish it because I felt isolated in my hospital. So I agree.
Absolutely.
And also a little side, I do pain medicine. I use methadone all the time. I think it's a wonderful medication for pain. It's very, very cheap. It's to me, but it's my opinion, it's easy to administer, control, educate patients about. I think increased education would eliminate physicians' fear on methadone. But it's really just a fear.
I use methadone a lot with critical kids.
Well, thank you, then.
Sorry, this is Scott Milton, and I had a comment and a question. One group of individuals that I haven't really heard discussed much, that seems to be a group that's certainly at risk for opiate abuse, are the physicians and the providers themselves. And I was wondering if you had any data about that. Obviously, there's lots of disincentives, for a physician to admit that he has a problem, and et cetera. So I was wondering if there's any data about how much of a problem that is with physicians or nurse practitioners or nurses. I mean, in my practice of 30 years, I have seen that commonly. I'm trained as an infectious disease doctor, and about 10 or 15 years ago, became mandated that hospitals needed to have antimicrobial stewardship committees. It's kind of an interesting story, but when we were trying to form that at our hospital, all we did was put in the newsletter that we were going to form a committee, and we watched the use of antibiotic use in the hospital drop 25%. So the point would be, is there a method, or would you consider something like an opioid stewardship program for the hospitals? And would that help curtail some of the overuse of opioids? That's it.
So to speak to your data question, I'm sure it exists among our regulatory partners. It's outside of our scope. We could perhaps look on DSHS to see what is available. They have like a workforce section of the Texas Health Data website, which is really great. I just don't know if they report on substance use off the top of my head. But to your point, the Physicians Association or Medical Board, one of those actually has a program for physicians who have substance use disorder to call in and receive help with those services. What we've done is noticed that was also happening in our paramedic community, as well as the nursing and health and the larger healthcare community. And so we've got the Heroes Helpline, which is a 24/7 call line for first responders, law enforcement, anyone who is struggling with their substance use, who is an actual service provider themselves, to call and get hooked up with treatment services and be referred out to whatever it is that they need to engage in that recovery. Further to that point, we've sort of collaborated with our regulatory partners in the paramedicine regulatory division. And what's going on there is that if they have lost their license due to substance use, if they call this line and they receive confidential services, as long as they can confirm that that person is now in fact recovered, the regulatory division will reinstate that paramedic license for them so that they can rejoin the workforce that means so much to them as their career field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, we're going to finish up because I know I'm in the way of people getting to lunch. But wanted to end with some of the other resources that we have available. I told you about our partnership with the governor's office in terms of getting the word out about fentanyl use. And so one of the things, our team has developed a bulletin that kind of outlines some trends and the impact of fentanyl use. We've also developed some media pushes as well. This is on page 38, slide 38 rather. So there you go. So we're planning on pushing that out to like close to 1,000 of our providers, so that they can have that information available. We also have a website. What is it? What's the website? txopioidresponse.org. And then we also have some video that people could access as well. We're continuing to refine some of those resources that are available, but I can see here that you can have there's a hyperlink to the actual video. We're also doing webinars. We're able to address, common questions related to fentanyl use. And then people will have access to the data that's available on the Department of State Health Services website, so that they can have that information. And then on slide number 39, you can also see some links there if individuals are interested in naloxone. We are a little, the question was asked a little bit earlier about the availability of it. I think most of you know there have been some challenges with that. So we are not like widely, publicizing that because we don't want to get into a situation where people, all run to that and then they're not able to get it. That's not good either. But I think we're getting better in terms of the availability of those resources. Then you can see some additional links there. Casey already talked about on slide number 41, the Heroes Helpline for first responders. That's available. You got the family planning clinics. We have drop-in centers. And then one of the really important ones that I should have mentioned earlier on page 42, we do have outreach, screening, and assessment and referral locations. There's 14 of those locations throughout Texas. They're affiliated with our local authorities. That's how people can call those locations and find out how they can gain access to any of the substance use services that we have available. And that's probably one of the best resources along with that TTOR website that we mentioned in terms of helping to point people in the right direction. So I know we've given you a lot of information today, and it goes without saying with the work that you have in front of you, it's going to be really, really important that we work collaboratively. We are happy to come back at any time or provide you with additional information. I know someone asked about our target populations. We're going to go back and provide that to you in writing so that you can have that available to you. I think it's also going to be important that we're not duplicating effort. And so we know all the entities that we have provided funding to and how much funding we provided and what that is for. I do know that there are a number of providers that have asked for either more money than what we have available or providers that have asked for money when we don't have any more dollars available. So I think that's kind of the type of information that we can provide to you. I think the other thing that we could partner on is, since we've been doing this since 2017, we have a good idea about some of the promising practices that really work effectively, and possibly expansion of those type of initiatives can be really good. Or maybe there's some other best practices or promising practices that have worked in other states that we can look at. We also have some really good data in terms of what's happening in certain catchment areas across Texas. So I think that our team can really be a tremendous resource to all of you.
Just a quick question. I know everybody's starving. I really I have this fantasy that we could do an environmental scan of what exists and what doesn't in terms of the workforce, now that everything has been so full of up and down and people fleeing and like loss of services in some areas that have nothing. And I'm really curious if that's something that if we recommended, if y'all could partner with us on that, or if that would be something that universities could do. Teach or,
we do a lot of contracting through the state universities that really help us with some of those type of study situations. And so, yes, we would be more than happy. I mean, it's a challenge for us. It's a huge challenge. You all know we have 254 counties. 70% of them are in rural areas, and sometimes it takes people 3 hours, to get to the closest service providers. We have really tried to, put new funding where we have gaps, and we need more services to be provided. But there's still some struggles. Even the rate of reimbursement is a challenge for some providers. We've had several providers back out. The other thing is some of our smaller providers are more mom and pop kind of service delivery systems, and sometimes they don't have multiple streams of funding, and so if they don't get paid like right away, that ends up being a challenge. And then you pair that up with not having the workforce that you need to get the actual work done. So yes, we are more than happy to partner with you all in any way that we can to make this a really good thing, for Texas.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other? Well, then what we'll do now is we'll break, and then I'd like to get started back at 1 o'clock. So I think TA will be next up. Is that right? Well, but they don't have.
They don't have anything.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll start back at 1 o'clock. Thank you. I think the time is 1 o'clock. We'll get started again. So the Department of State Health Services could not be with us today, but they actually provided written information. And so in the packet, that's on page 30. If anyone wants to review that at your convenience. But right now, we're going to turn to Texas Education Agency. Now, remember, I think you have that presentation for us.
Yes, sir. It's right there.
Let's see, is that on page 147?
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alejandro Delgado, Deputy Commissioner of Operations at the Texas Education Agency. I'm here with my colleague, Julie Wingman, who's our Director of Mental Health. So thankful to be here with the council today, with our colleagues across the state agencies, and to discuss this really important, really growing crisis in our schools. The news reports are more frequent than they used to be around the fentanyl crisis affecting our schools. So before we get started, I do want to level set a little bit about the scale of the public education system. So TA is 1,000 employees based here in Austin. We have 20 education service centers that are relatively independent. Kind of think of them, and they're across the state. They're kind of our field service agents. They don't directly report to us, but we work very closely with them and collaborate with them. We're basically the support on the ground for our schools. So public education systems, about 1,200 school systems that include independent school districts and public charter schools that we oversee, 9,000 campuses, 750,000 school personnel, and almost 5.5 million kids. So it is a very big school system, second largest in the country. And we're responsible for guidance, support, and leadership of those school systems. And so the fentanyl crisis, obviously, like I mentioned, is a growing crisis here. It's affecting our schools. And, I'll talk about our response really in 3 buckets. So our immediate response, our medium-term response, and then our long-term response. So in the short term, or in immediate, what we're doing immediately is that, one, we are reinforcing with school systems that to utilize their partners on the ground. So so everyone from their community-based organizations to their peer systems and their ESC. In addition, just today, actually, we sent a letter to all 1,200 school systems, to the superintendents. That's our kind of delivery chain, because one thing we're finding actually is that the larger school systems with the communication resources are the ones that are able to get the message out. So by us amplifying the message, we're getting it out to the smaller school systems that are impacted. And one thing I'll note around our responsibility and our role in fighting fentanyl is that we are a disseminator of information. That is our key role in this space. And so we sent out a superintendent letter this morning that includes an overview of the impact of fentanyl, which a lot of people don't realize. How just a little bit can cause big problems. We reminded them of the resources that already exist that actually Julie Wayman and her office helps coordinate with HHSC, from behavioral mental preventative use of local prevention efforts. And then we also provided a link to facilitated handouts on how to have these conversations with their students. And then, of course, as a result of the governor's letter, we initiated an agency planning process so that we can identify better ways to support our school systems. In addition to that, there's two already created resources that we are directing our school systems to use. So one are our prevention resource centers that are funded by HHSC and that school systems have access to. And then TEA and our education service centers maintain a mental health resource database that we are funneling our school systems to utilize. And a lot of it is people don't realize that they exist. And so we have to make sure that we funnel that. And of course, we have an email address and hotline for districts to call if they need help. So immediate response is primarily around we're communicating to school districts. It's now a topic of conversation when we ask superintendents, how are things going? What's on your mind? And then of course amplifying already existing resources that exist. So in the medium term, we are creating a communications toolkit, so a more robust communications toolkit, and we're aiming for an end of October delivery of that communications toolkit. Everything from things that we've created, so you'll see, I'm not sure the slide is on my slide 8. We're developing logos and messages for our smaller school systems to use. And for the larger school districts that have already created actually really strong communication resources, we are, with their permission, adapting those and getting those out to the field. So think about Hayes, actually Round Rock just came out with a suite of communication materials. And then correspondence templates to send to their community. So we are, like I said, our medium-term response is really equipping our school districts with the communication resources that they need. So to summarize, message amplification in the medium term, we are sharing these messages with superintendents. So the commissioner is at least once a week across the state meeting with superintendents where he is both saying, here are the resources, we know it's an issue, tell me what else you need. And then we have our monthly superintendent call that we also host. In addition, in our internal working groups and with our partners, we are interested and a little bit exploring long-term policy improvements related to canned use distribution that is currently helping schools in their immediate response. Long-term, Julie and her team working with HHSC are attempting to equip every service center has their team of mental and behavioral health experts. And so one thing that we're attempting to do is train them in anti-fentanyl messaging, communication, support, and resources for districts. We're also planning a webinar series for school personnel on how to address the issue both in real time during emergencies and how to do more preventative efforts. And then finally, we're continuing to update our TA's substance abuse process and policies. So that's our short-term, medium-term, and long-term response to Abatement.
So let me ask this, how do you, obviously with fentanyl in specific, you kind of model off what you've done in the past with either other drug type issues, but do you see or think that kind of the prevalent, especially the rainbow fentanyl, is much more seemingly appealing, unfortunately, to you than something that looks like a pill of a different color. And so I guess, have y'all had discussions or how do we specifically better address that? And I was just, prior to being here when Colonel McGraw was talking about, and I just mentioned, some of the tragedies we've had as high school kids and with 3 teenagers. Use those, unfortunately, some of this is tragedy to try to educate my kids and hopefully educate other kids that they are friends with in the school. Because these are real issues these kids are going to deal with. X months ago or a year ago, it was not. So I guess I'm just curious, how do we bring that more front?
So I'll give you a couple of examples actually that we're including in our communications toolkit. There's an emoji code out there where different emojis, which is like the thumbs up, that there's apparently an emoji code, and that's actually there's a federal resource that has it's like a poster of all the emoji codes and what drug they stand for. They represent. So we're going to include that in our communication resources because when you're looking at cell phones and you see emoji codes, like that's something that could trigger that. In addition, I just saw it this morning. One of Brown Rocks ISD's posters is actually it's a pencil, so relevant to schools, and it shows at the very tip of the pencil the amount of fentanyl that's needed to cause an overdose. And that was like really powerful. It doesn't take a lot. So I will say both what we're hearing from the field. This is not your typical and I have a 5 and 7-year-old by the way, so I'm worried for my own 5 and 7-year-old, right? Because it could look like a Skittle. So it is on our radar, and this is why the primary approach to our response is related to communications, because we just have to inform folks that this is not your typical kind of drug response.
Can I also ask a question? So I did a project with Cardia, which is a research agency, and we did some presentations for school nurses and school counselors about the opioid epidemic. And our finding was that the schools were so disparate in terms of where they were in terms of readiness for change. So there were some schools that already had Narcan on hand, had a list of referrals that they had good relationships with, and the nurses were willing to make those referrals. Then there were schools that said, we don't have a problem like that, which of course is a common stance that's comforting to parents, but not true. And everything in between. I mean, literally there were some schools where the school nurses said, we're not allowed to make referrals because we'll have to pay for the services, blah, blah, blah. So we only use OSARs or whatever it is. And no, we can't have Narcan. Are you kidding? That's too complicated. It's too dangerous. They don't even have the knowledge about it. The other thing that I would ask is my college kids that just came from high schools. Some say they came from schools that had drug dogs and they were constantly doing checks, and that there were literally schools where they weren't allowed to put their heads down on the desk because they could be overdosing. Literally, nobody was allowed to do this. And then there were other schools, again, where there was absolutely nothing going on, where, they were still signing no-use contracts. And that was where they were at. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about sort of engaging at all the different levels to get those connections made.
Yeah, that's a great question and point, and that's the challenge of the public. Of course. Our largest school district, Houston ISD, has about 200,000 students. Our smallest has 6 kids in Big Bend National Park. And so it is the challenge of our system, and this is not our typical space, right? And so we saw this with COVID. COVID was a public health emergency. We're not a public health agency. So it required actually, and appreciative of all the partnerships with our peer agencies. What I will say, this is why our relationship with the education service centers is so important, because they're the ones closest to the districts, and they're the ones with the strongest relationships to the districts. Because in this space, we can't necessarily tell the schools you've got to do this. So we can manage it through positional authority of the agency, but ultimately, and some influence, but ultimately it's the education service centers that can manage through initiative and influence to address that, or to give us a heads up. Hey, this school district is struggling and they don't have a real approach. You might need to go in there and just go and provide support and extra community, or call the superintendent and say, hey, you need to do about this. So that's where I think we tag team our approach. but it's also what makes it extremely challenging.
And what is your opinion of sort of specialized schools and alternative schools? Because they tend to get kids that are at higher risk. And we have a recovery high school, the University High School here in Austin, and there's a great one in Houston, and there's some sprinkled around the state. But and evidently, all those kids use opioids, like that's a thing. But I think I'm curious if there's specific programming that you might do that's more kind of indicated prevention instead of
great
universal.
that we'll consider.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thanks.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering if there's any way you can mandate that the school nurses in the state get training in the use of naloxone and push that forward, and that should be pushed forward in every at least high school. Maybe.
The SROs.
So I'll let Julie opine on this, but my understanding is that we don't actually own or are responsible for the rule writing around nurses. That's actually in HHSC. Is that accurate? And then SROs.
Support, but we can support, we can coordinate and help facilitate that conversation. I think that's where that policy discussion, right, once we want to get into that, so we can look at where those gaps are.
And we don't, is my understanding also, Julie, please check me, we don't oversee campus nurses, right? That's HHSC and DSHS. It's very interesting kind of overlapping areas of responsibility. Other questions?
I have one more, I'm sorry. But some of my research, the area of cultural grounding of prevention programs, because different areas of the state have such different mechanisms for, not just drug offers, but drug resistance strategies and all of that kind of thing. Is there a standardized prevention mechanism that's recommended to everybody, and then possibilities of tailoring those, or does each school sort of decide what kind of prevention they want?
Yes, they do decide locally. Each school district is supposed to develop prevention practices and procedures. We do, HHSC and TPA recommends a suite, a list of things that are age appropriate, evidence-based, everything great from research. SAMHSA has a lot. We've got a lot of how do you talk to children. There are cultural considerations. One thing we're also doing in this next phase is we're going to collect things up from districts that we can continue to add to the website resource list that we've created. So we see this as becoming kind of an interchange, sharing. We can create kind of like a professional learning community and keep it on at top of mind in all those different groups. We feel we want to collect more of what you're talking about and share it out, right? There was just a great parent night at the district. They got 81 parents there the other night just to come and learn about all of this and that kind of thing. So when we hear about that, the tools they used, how it is, we're going to be collecting and sharing information. Thank you.
I was going to ask if you have some information about the prevalence and the trend of opioid misuse among middle school and high school students.
Did you say if we have training? Is it have you guys actually
Numbers about use of.
We don't collect that data.
Do you follow up on that question? Do you oversee the tech school survey, or is that a different agency?
The risk survey is DSHS. Yeah.
Sure.
Which is an important survey and an important piece.
Yeah. I guess this is my more commentary than anything, but the changes in that survey every time, just to inform those of you who maybe don't use it, make it very hard to give number. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but make it very hard to give numbers that he's suggesting because they're asking different questions every cycle.
We might be able to break out some discipline data regarding what we know. For example, a 5-year average, 23,000 plus kids per year with substance abuse and alcohol, right? Just in terms of school activities. So I can just share that with you. That data is out there. So there is data onto the discipline side.
Because one of the big issues we have with students in this state is the different schools are eligible and make themselves eligible to participate in different state or federal surveys, meaning that from my kind of academic point of view, we don't have a great idea of actual numbers like you're being suggested, because we have a sampling bias, frankly, for both our contribution from Texas to the national survey as well as our own state survey. And so that maybe is something that maybe we could try to push forward in some way, because we don't have good knowledge.
Consistent numbers are good.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
Other questions for TA? Okay. Thank you all for your time. Instantly appreciate it and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Yes, sir.
As we're all in that together. Okay, so then we're now going to turn to the Department of Family and Protective Services. Thanks, Doctor. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting the Department of Family and Protective Services to talk about the intersection between opioid use and the work that we do. My name is Dr. I am the Chief Prevention and Community Wellbeing Officer, and the prevention of what we're doing is to prevent child abuse and neglect. But and I will get to that part and what we may be able to offer. But first, I'm going to talk about our Child Protective Investigation Division, our Child Protective Services Division, and then our Adult Protective Services Division, and then I'll touch on the prevention work. So Child Protective Investigations, as you might imagine, is an arm that conducts abuse or neglect investigations based on reports called in to a hotline. Just for scale, in fiscal year 21, they did 157,000 investigations of child abuse and neglect. So they're in the homes of very vulnerable Texans, so usually in a time of crisis. If and when there are substance use issues, and that is clearly a predominant, sometimes the actual primary source of the child neglect is the substance use disorder of the parents, and then other times it's just an exacerbating factor in the family and the abuse or neglect that may be occurring. But when it is identified, our staff, and it is state staff doing investigations across the state, they refer to OSARs as a primary means of accessing substance use, both screening and treatment. And then depending on where the investigation goes, obviously the court system will get involved in order and drug treatment and or drug testing as part of the investigation and next steps. And the Child Protective Investigation Division, because substance use is such a large part of child abuse and neglect cases, we do have 5 substance use specialists that provide training and technical assistance to field staff and on substance use and its impact on children and families. So that is part of our approach. We do have an opportunity to address the crisis by perhaps having a proper drug testing panel. Our current drug testing options, when we do suspect drug use in a parent, do not include fentanyls. It's a hair and it's the other type of drug testing. So we do have an opportunity to maybe progress our work in that area to add that drug testing in our contractors. We contract for drug testing at the agency. So that's the investigative work. The next division in DFPS is our Child Protective Services. This is when the agency either begins working with a family on family preservation services in an effort to avoid removing, or when the child comes into temporary or permanent management service of the state, and the state becomes the parent of that child. And in that case, we're much more centered on substance use issues for the children in care, which often is the case. And for Child Protective Services, they do same thing, they use OSAR to refer children for substance use treatment. And they also have 3 staff that are substance use treatment experts. But again, more focused on our children in care and their needs rather than maybe adults and parents out at the community level. They are planning on beefing up, as a response to everything you all have been talking about today, beefing up their training. materials and developing a resource guide and a front-facing webpage on the fentanyl crisis as it relates to the kind of work or our kind of stakeholders who interact with us regarding family needs out in the community. Again, maybe adding to our drug testing suite, a panel to include fentanyl, more, I mean, a lot of things you all have touched on in some of these other spaces today, more enhancing education about naloxone and how to use it, and just making sure our CPS caseworkers, who are also part of a lot of community collaboratives with schools and juvenile detention and the courts, just increasing their awareness. I'll know I took my 16-year-old to her well child, and I was surprised that she got, my pediatrician said, "Have you given her the fentanyl talk?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know what it was." And she just proceeded to just say everything you all just said to my 16-year-old. So I think it's just this rapid information flow to everyone working with kids and families that we want the agency to take part of. So those are our child, on our child survey side. We do also have the Adult Protective Services Division, which investigates abuse and neglect and financial exploitation of the elderly and adults with disabilities. They similarly may refer clients, if that is partly what's happening, if there are substance use issues, that refer to community resources. They do report it's not a predominant issue in the investigations that they conduct, that largely they see a lot of self-neglect. And if there are substance use issues, it might be more family members misusing the prescription drugs of the APS client. And so that's sort of the predominant substance use issue for Adult Protective Services. But they do around 82,000 investigations a year. And so there's, of course, some intersection in their client base and opioid use, and also the ability to fan out and provide information to community members and service providers that work and support that population, that vulnerable population. In our prevention division, which is what I run, we largely grant funding to evidence-based programs, and predominantly to increase the relational health between parents and children, starting as young as, or starting in pregnancy with our Nurse Family Partnership Program. And then we do have more youth-serving programs that are targeting at-risk youth and have an explicit goal of diverting kids from the juvenile justice system. And those are a couple of them that I'm going to highlight. So we have a Family Youth and Success Program as a set of grantees that have counseling and crisis support available for families in all 254 counties. So they're often getting referrals from juvenile courts or the schools around kiddos who may be struggling, and particularly if the issue seems to be something going on at home. Substance use isn't a huge issue that they're encountering, but it often can be, and again, they can be a vehicle for education. Our agency also has a Texas Youth Helpline that takes, actually half of the calls are from parents concerned about their youth. So we have that intersection point with the general population just to help both youth and families that are struggling. We're hearing more about suicidality or conflict than we are hearing about substance use, but that is a place or a resource we have available. And then we fund a community youth development program, which is zip code level focused, where there's high juvenile crime rates. And those have youth leaders councils and youth leadership councils, where we have really a great opportunity with youth leaders who are in underserved areas, doing really creating recreational opportunities for youth to build their resilience. And again, real great opportunity to connect with youth serving organizations and collaboratives. So that's kind of the broad level overview, I think, of DFPS and what we are doing and what we might be able to participate in. Any questions?
So, I wonder if you think stigma plays a role. I think that when families have come to me, they very often say it's depression, it's manic depression, it's suicidality. They don't want to admit that drugs are part of the picture. They like to consider it self-medication and think they're afraid of the legal system. So I imagine all of your workers are trained in sort of building a baseline for trust and whatnot, but I would question with 1 in 4 families impacted by substance use, that it's probably much more prevalent than, and people just aren't reporting it.
Well, absolutely. And of course, you know, when a family is involved in child protection, they tend to not be as open, or they don't have sort of a trusting relationship with folks who may have the potential to remove their kiddos. And drug use does sort of elevate the involvement or the potential involvement in child protection. And I know a lot of, you know, everyone's a mandatory reporter, and that often you'll hear clinicians say things like, well, if I know about substance use, I'll have to call CPS. So I do think it does perhaps disincentivize, and much like many other, I think, sort of same with maternal depression or anything that, you know, or maternal substance use. I mean, that's a huge space where we get involved, and where mothers may not seek treatment because they don't want to lose their children. And obviously positive drug testing at birth is another big intersection point with child protection when infants test positive at the hospital. So there is absolutely a lot of service shyness around sort of seeking drug treatment when there are children involved. Either the child has a substance use issue and or the parents have a substance use issue. So I agree with that.
What is the process if we're, ideally we'd want these folks to enter into some sort of traditional healthcare setting, seek treatment, et cetera. What is the process if a mother, like you mentioned, does test positive or has a substance use report?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to ask my colleagues about the exact screening criteria, but I know there's a lot of nuance in triaging at first at intake. And I think those cases where there's already services in place and there's not a real known risk to the child, maybe don't even get opened. And then if they get opened, then again, some more triaging happens at the investigation level and referrals. I mean, there's always been a preference to preserve the family and keep children together, even when there is substance use. And there are substance use treatment programs that even allow children or infants to go with mom to even inpatient care. They're not, but of course, like everything else, there's capacity limitation for those types of slots. So sometimes it isn't an option. And that in and of itself, just accessing treatment causes a parenting issue. But so I think, and then some of what also depends is on the judges in that community. And I mean, part of that is that obviously the department has a role in what it brings to the courts, and the courts have a role in what they decide to do in terms of removal. So I would say largely just known substance use isn't an automatic removal of your children, but every step along the way does increase the risk. And if you happen to be in a community where there aren't a lot of services available, it does put DFPS in sort of a tough spot because the child is vulnerable.
Well, I would say that's what we're trying to figure out. So if there's more information about
yeah, we can certainly get some more nuance. Yeah.
Because we say, you know, there's certain communities that don't have this, and it's causing people to have their homes as well as their medical life destroyed. You know, that's kind of what I think we want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will impact DFPS either way. I know in other states we're having a big opioid crisis. They were just children in foster care because everybody in their family literally already died.
Yes.
And which is another tricky. Sorry.
Couple questions. I would expect that it's easier to detect if youths are having a substance use disorder. Would you say that's true as opposed to their parents who are being investigated or
I don't know, but I don't know that it's easier. I think that there's a lot of known substance use. Sometimes it's the reason that the investigation is being called in. So I don't think it's as hard to detect for the parents.
or hard for your agency to detect drug use in youth?
Is it easier for us to detect drug use
as opposed to their parents?
I don't think it's easier or harder, but maybe I'm misunderstanding. I think because they do, I mean, they have the ability to go to a court and get a court order to require drug testing for their parents. It's what typically happens if they suspect drug use. And so that's kind of the route they go. Whereas, and the only drug testing I would suspect they're doing that I know of that are of youth are either, again, think the drug testing happening in a hospital at birth, not by the agency, that triggers a call. or perhaps drug testing of children who are in conservatorship, and there's a concern by the foster parent, and then the agency as a managing conservator agrees to that drug testing. Do I understand?
Yes, and then it led me to my second question, which is how many of these youths are being treated for substance use disorder through your agency, detected and treatment initiated?
Yeah, I don't have that number, but we can get that data for you. Like of our children in our conservatorship, how many are receiving drug treatment services? Yeah, we can certainly find that out.
When you talk about, hi, this is Catherine. When you talk about capacity, could you expound upon that a little bit more? Is it a funding issue? Is it, of course, just like everything else, there's not enough providers out there? What are the things when you talk about capacity? And then in terms of that, is there like a wait list for those families that do have a drug problem that are, maybe in FBSS or removals that they're waiting to get that treatment because of capacity concerns?
Yeah, when I was talking about capacity, it wasn't capacity, any of our service capacity, but rather the capacity of inpatient substance use treatment that allowed children to co-reside with their parent during treatment so that you didn't have the separation, which is particularly hard if the parent is a single parent. So that's what I meant, and that would be an HHSC question. I just know I've heard that in conversations as an issue, that there's only so many drug treatment places that are able to offer that additional capacity to bring children in to the treatment facilities. Regarding, we would have to again, I'm trying to think out loud how we would get a sense for the substance use treatment capacity for our parents, because we're never paying directly for those services. And I think a lot of that is probably tracked through court orders and not in our own data system, Catherine. We can figure out how we can paint a picture of the number of families, either in family preservation or seeking reunification of their children, which would be the two ways in which families are still involved in with their biological children, that we're how many of them are seeking drug treatment or unable to access it, therefore escalating the need for intervention by child protection. But I can circle back about that. Appreciate it. Sure.
Can you help me understand more about the problem with fentanyl? You said you're unable to test for fentanyl at this time, and
yep. My understanding, we pay for drug testing through contract, and our current contract does not include the fentanyl panel, which I think would be double the cost of what we're paying for. I think we already have like containment measures to try to contain the amount of drug testing we are already doing. And so I think that there's financial concerns there. Yeah, it's not part of the contracted set of services we have at the moment.
Yeah, with the current problem with fentanyl, it would probably worth the expense.
Yeah.
Could you get back with us how much it would cost?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. So now let's see. So the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, they also send in materials. So those are in your packets for your review. And then also the Higher Ed Coordinating Board, they sent in some written materials that are in our packets as well for our review. Thank you, ladies. And so at this time, I'll ask for Texas Workforce Commission. Thank you, Michael. You're here. Sure. To go over some of y'all's actions and efforts. Thank you for being here. And let's see that. I think your presentation's on page 182. Go ahead.
So I heard, council members, thanks so much for having us. For the record, Michael Traeger, Deputy Director for Outreach and Employer Initiatives at the Texas Workforce Commission. So, as many of the agencies that are presenting or will be presenting in front of you today, we have answered Governor Abbott's call to amplify the efforts in fighting opioid and specifically fentanyl epidemic in Texas. Now, even though our agency, the Texas Workforce Commission, does have broad responsibilities, it does sum up workforce. And as many agencies, there are many different approaches to the workforce. There are many different elements. So even though we're not on the front lines of the fight, we want to be and are ready to be a willing partner in getting the information out and making sure that all of the elements of the workforce have the information and resources available to them. For example, the workforce aspects that we cover is both the employers, the employees, and the public. And even in that breakdown, there are many different elements. For example, besides the employer initiative, something that you may see in the headlines with our grants, skills development programs, we also are working with employees on the apprenticeships and internships, building pipeline, education outreach. So we are reaching out to our potential or future workforce as early as middle and high schools, and then we are reaching them in the sunset of their career. So we want to cover that entire spectrum. Also, VC wants to make sure that parents can go to work, and childcare is a significant issue. So we have programs, robust programs on the childcare side. We work with many local partners, 28 boards, all covering the entire state, and they also have 180 offices throughout. We also have a very significant vocational rehabilitation presence. The reason I'm saying all of this is that creates a very robust network for us to disseminate the information. So we got to work, as you'll see in our campaign plan. We are looking to help our sister agencies, everyone who has presented here, to get the information and resources out to our audiences. And that's employers, employees, schools, not to duplicate efforts with TEA and Health and Human Services, our vocational rehabilitation, and even our child care providers, which will hopefully strike in the heart of the problem. So the campaign will be multifaceted, but mostly information outreach. So we already began with social media, and we stood up a website right off of our homepage, tlvc.texas.gov/fentanyl, easy to find. And we started off with facts and resources, impact. We ran very quick numbers, and more than 75% of employers nationwide report that they had some kind of difficulties in their workplace related to opioids. This is a significant issue where we're hoping to be part of that solution. We're currently in phase 2 of our campaign. We have already begun pushing out social media. We did stand up the website. We are reaching out to our boards, all of our stakeholders. We're providing all the information that Health and Human Services have provided to us, and they did an excellent job. We're also creating digital and printed flyers. Believe it or not, we've heard that posted posters are an effective way. I know it's 20%, but many of our partners are asking for printed posters. So we'll be reaching them any way they think might be effective and any way that we can effective. We're not asking for any appropriation from the legislature. We're using the currently appropriated funding for our current campaign and the future, and we'll be happy to share any of the information, resources, digital or otherwise, with anyone who is interested. And please count us as a willing partner. Happy to answer any questions.
So are your constituents employers or the public, or both? I guess
three: employers, employees, and the public.
Okay. So is there an issue in Texas with having workers available in certain industries because of their substance use problems? Like very common in other states.
Sure. There is an issue with worker availability. Currently, we don't remember the exact number, but there's currently about 3 posting for every available person. I'm not sure the exact correlation between opioid, and I don't want to guess. However, we did have our labor market information folks run some numbers. They don't have that available, but if that's something of interest, we'll be happy to respond.
I mean, at least as a talking to employers, there's a significant issue in certain job opportunities where you can't pass through just. Significant numbers, especially, one that has a high turnover is truck drivers. We need lots of truck drivers. And so that is one at least that I wouldn't cite percentages, but I'm thinking about conversations I've had with business owners, and it's big numbers, enormous numbers.
So that's kind of what is TWC like over? Is there a domain to understand the business owner?
Y'all collect some of that data, numbers from businesses. I don't know.
We're not, but we do have some secondary, even though we don't have the primary data sources, we do have some secondary. The initial research when we were preparing for the campaign didn't have that number readily available, but we'll continue to search.
That is my question. Did you contract with an agency that devised the campaign, or that was your do?
That's ours. Part of my division is outreach. So we have both our communication, our press shop, and the campaigns and creative content. So we did it.
Okay.
And it looks great. If you
I just know that, like, I've worked with the communications department, Mike Mackert's team that did PDMP, and sometimes what looks great doesn't always have the impact
the
that
reach, yes.
right.
So we're tracking that very closely. Unfortunately, just by definition, there's a lot of funding for unearned media, so for paid advertising. So we do have to.
No, I didn't mean that to be critical at all. I just was sharing that it's an exacting science, and it's unfortunate that there's been limited resources for that.
But just the fact that it is a unified campaign, and again, kudos to Governor Abbott's press shop who tried to unify everyone together. We even use the same hashtag, one pill kills. So we'll be able to track our campaign, our unified statewide campaign. So hopefully we will help each other out.
Question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate your time. Commissioners, thank you. Appreciate your time very much. So with that, now we're going to move on to agenda item number 4. Amanda, I think you have the expenditure report.
Yes, thank you, Councilor. So council members, in fiscal year 2022, the trust fund received about $60.78 million, and the council did not expend any of those funds. So that's more, we have to report to the legislature that no funds were expended. You can see that is provided in your materials on page 14. And that is all I have.
Assuming there's no questions on that. All right. Then let's see. Now we've got 2022 revenue from settlement agreements, and
Yes, thank you, Comptroller. So here, just wanted to update you all that no new revenues have been received since our last meeting in August. We haven't received anything from any of the settlement agreement for the court orders thus far. So our numbers to report are very close to the August numbers of, again, about $60.78 million in the trust fund, $57.3 million in the opioid abatement account, and about $12.6 million in the subdivision share. So you can see a copy of this breakdown, including the interest that has grown in those accounts on page 12 of the meeting materials. And that is all I have.
And then how about update on implementation and administrative services?
Yes, thank you, Comptroller. So I want to share the highlights of what our staff has been up to provide you all the administrative services that you need to conduct your work. So we have been preparing a guide for addressing travel and reimbursement costs for attending our council meetings in person. We are regularly meeting with stakeholders and interested groups to provide information on structure and goals of the council and how to stay updated on our developments. We are researching costs and models associated with an electronic grant management system to receive, review, and audit grant applications once those are live. We are engaging with local government organizations at their conferences to inform them again about the council and its statutory duties. And we are drafting proposed rules to provide options for structure of the grant application process and structure for the council for procedures during meetings and outside of meetings. And the rules will follow the required administrative rulemaking process that I'll briefly outline. So the council will be given an opportunity to review and approve the proposed rules. The proposed rules will be published in our Texas Register for public comment. Once they are published, the public will have 30 days to comment on those proposed rules. And then after considering the public comments, the council will be given the opportunity to review and adopt rules. So there'll still be time in those periods where the council can make its recommendation for changes and make its recommendation based on public comments. And we are working to hire additional staff. For example, a position is currently posted for an outreach and communications specialist. And finally, you all should have received an email from me seeking feedback regarding a procurement for a vendor to help staff provide you all with resources as you evaluate and decide on priorities for eligible uses of the funds. So please feel free to also email me if you already have some times available in the next coming weeks. That will help, but I'll also be reaching out to you by phone and by email to see if you'd like to personally provide some feedback. And that is all I have.
Any questions, comments on that whole process that we're trying to go through to get everything stood up so we can distribute money?
I guess my question I would have is, at what point is it within your organization versus on the council to actually review the appropriateness, feasibility of the grants themselves, of the proposals, grant proposals themselves?
Well, I hear you.
Great question. And that's what we're trying to propose is a procedure for that.
Okay.
And we are thinking of different levels of proposals, right? Like proposals for areas that have nothing, proposals for areas that have nation work, and proposals for large institutions that already have things rolling kind of thing.
And I think, that's the whole point of trying to have individual conversations, of trying to figure out what all needs to go in this, because, in at least statutorily, there's, and part of this was reminding me as we were going through talking about partnerships, HHSC in particular.
Yes.
So there's certain things that are already going on that are occurring. And then you have, of the total set of funds that are coming to the state of Texas, you recall you got 70% that lies within you as decision makers. So we as staff that are supporting the council per se, which come to your question, but then you also have 15% of the money is the legislature can decide how to appropriate. The locals get 15% of the money. And so I think it's pretty important just to make sure that we constantly have a true view of what all different layers are going. So duplication of resources and being able to maximize those. So that's one comment, but then coming back to, at least I would assume each one of you in your own roles of being busy in your day jobs don't want to sit here and peruse through every single application that comes before the council and say, hey, I'm going to rank this one. So we need to set up a process upon which that vetting occurs. And so therefore, then you have that information, and then it gets filtrated through the different buckets that the state statute requires and just being distributed across, is it 12 or 16 health regions? 20. Okay, I'm just undercutting it. I guess I consolidated some in my thought process, some across the 20. And then obviously if there's not enough request in one region, then it gets pro rata pre-shared back. And so, it's complicated.
It's complicated.
Very complicated. Just taking in the formulas upon which the council has to make decisions and how we set up a system. And so, I know there are some inquiries, well, can we just go ahead and get some money today? Well, I would love to, but the problem is we've got to set this very complicated process up so then everybody has a fair opportunity to come to those dollars. And it's not just, oh, well, you asked for something and then you didn't ask. And so that's one thing that we need that input, because you're the expert. We're not. We're just the support agency per se that is trying to put all of this before you. So that's kind of really, we're trying to get this accomplished as quick as possible, but obviously as diligently and open, transparent. And the way I also see it, and again, for comments, is that first kind of tranche of dollars, whatever the vendor that we will ultimately work with as we put in an RFP, hopefully we have several that want to, let's hope. And then that's selected in that system that all the requests filtrate through. Y'all have the information, make a decision. That may change, between round 1 and round 2 the next year. Are there things that we saw, oh, we need to wait more here, wait here? I mean, I see it as a changing process. And then 2, fentanyl that we talked a lot about today is one significant issue. Well, is that the same thing in 2 years from now? Right. That either you or whoever's on the council will be making this. So I will see it, in my opinion, as kind of council says, we need to redirect or refocus some of those resources. So that's probably more words than you wanted.
No, that was good. That was good, because my big concern, we keep talking about duplication. Honestly, there's so little going on that I worry less about duplication than I worry about silos and disconnection. And so whoever is distributing the money, it can't just be, this is a great proposal. It's got to be, how does it fit into the system that we decide are the evidence-based practices that need, and the realms that need to be involved. And I think that hasn't been done yet. Like, I think TTOR is great because they're funding a lot of it, but I don't think there's been communication among those that have received the money in the way that there could be, perhaps, and constant looking for like evaluations and gaps and new issues and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's the complexity that I'm not sure how to get my arm.
Understand. Yeah, and obviously then if you sit here and say, well, I'm not sure how I get my arms around it, well, how do you think we feel?
Right,
right.
Right.
We haven't lived in this world as long as we haven't. So, Amanda, as the one that I had asked to do this job, who probably regrets it now, but anyway, it's hers now. So, trying to get that additional staff, and then Nikki and Corey down here, but I'm trying to play a very active role in making sure I'm very involved, at least for the first several years, in part because the legislature, they're going to start saying, okay, well, we have money that we have to distribute, and locals. And so I feel like, at least so I have those relationships, being able to bring that to them, because they put it over here for a reason. And then hopefully once all this gets, we get everything set in processes, and the council, y'all are comfortable, and we're, getting things accomplished, dollars allocated, then since I designated Corey, if she's still willing to be with me in whatever that time period, I'm like, okay, maybe Glenn doesn't have to be in every board meeting. So I like y'all. We got some other things too. So anyway, but yeah, we would like that input. I mean, that's what we're asking for, because we want to set it up the right way and put the money out there where it can be most effectively utilized. Does that make sense? Do you want to add something?
What exactly is our timeline for coming up with this process? And I guess I'm not real clear on that. And then what exactly, what kind of organizations are we sending this RFP out to that we're expecting them to do? Just not really super clear on what kind of organization we're talking about we're sending this RFP out to, and then what our timeline is. I'm an ER doctor. We like to get things done quickly. So for me, it's a long process that I don't really comprehend. So how quickly are we planning to get these things in motion? And the RFP, can you a little bit more about what kind of organizations we're sending this out to?
So I'll touch a little bit on our procurement process, but again, I'm happy to revisit this in more detail with you, Dr. Demore, as we could work through. But generally speaking, the process is, where we're at right now is a general inquiry request for information. So we're receiving information from various entities, and we're receiving information from you all as experts in your fields into what really needs to go into this specific request for this vendor, acknowledging that we can go back out and solicit for different services and a different request. So it's going to, this first request is going to be what this council decides we need first, so to speak, or maybe the more immediate need, because it seems like there's various items that are priority.
And that's not sent to one or two groups. That's an actual posting state government process upon which it is put out in the public domain for anyone and everyone that wants to essentially provide information to us, how they can play a role. And then subsequently, then that helps us formulate. When I say us, I don't mean just us as staff of CPA, but I'm talking about the council, upon which an RFP is put out. And just like that, with that request for proposal, that is going to be to anyone and everyone. So we're not sending it to group A, B, or C. That is out for anyone and everyone in the world that wants to try to essentially bid on being part of this process to help us figure out how we're going to distribute the money and help you. Yes.
Could there be a preliminary environmental scan of what already exists and where the gaps are, such that we could then have that as a springboard for making decisions about
a lot of the requests for information is to help identify that.
Great. Okay.
That's what an initial request for information is for. So then you can start figuring out, are there people entities that you have confidence can accomplish whatever you envision that money, how it formulates, under a formula process that the legislature set up, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, government does function slower, but the fact is, we as government have to model ourselves off of what other sister agencies have done in the past, and how you make it where it's open, it's transparent, everybody has a seat at the table, everybody gets an opportunity. You know how the formulas operate, so there's nothing making a decision in the darkness. It is truly an open process. Otherwise, everybody and anybody who's part of it will then be out in the media scathed because it was one of you making a decision and, oh, you're part of this group. Right. And it's just some small connection through a cousin. And so therefore, oh my gosh, did you push money to? No, we want to have a very clear, open process that everyone understands. Okay. Everything is above board because it is hundreds of millions of dollars ultimately that is flowing through this council. So that's why you take those extra steps from a government standpoint rather than, it's business, throw it out there. Yes.
So we don't really know who we're going to send an RFP out for right now. We're just, I guess I'm confused as to our roles then, like why we were appointed for certain things. And maybe it's just, I can understand getting the transparency and but I'm just trying to comprehend. It seems like we're wasting a lot of time.
And I can respect that. The fact is, if it was given to another organization or if it was given to a private sector, well, then it could be done different. But it's given to state government. And state government functions a little bit slower. And so therefore, it has to be set up in processes that follow our traditional procurement process.
So, but the answer is, though, we don't know what kind of RFP we're actually putting out. And that's what we're trying to find from the request for information. I'm just trying to...
It's kind of like this. We know we're going to build a house, but we don't know if it's 1 story, 2 story. It's got 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bedrooms, how many baths. We're trying to build the house. And we're trying to figure out how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms. Is it going to be a counter, no counter? Do we have an area for a dining? Do we not have a dining area? What do we want? And the fact is, we know that state legislation says the money has to be distributed across the 20 regions. It has to be distributed through a couple different buckets. And so therefore, no one has ever done this before. It's never been done. We are inventing the car right now. And so it takes longer when you don't have the blueprint that tells you how to take someone else's car and redesign it for yourself. Yeah. We are designing the car.
So I understand we're getting all the funds. Are all the states getting it at the same time? Is there another state that's up and running here?
All the state settlements that are going through the process, yeah, no one's ahead of another. So there's a couple of different processes. One, there's national litigation, and then there's also individual state litigations. And so it kind of depends on which one kind of takes precedent, because each defendant, they really want to settle all their cases nationally is what they want. And you know, because there are, I don't know how many settlements have been reached, but whether it's the distributors, the manufacturers, the distributors, the retailers, you know, are three different buckets. And then you have the complexity of 50 states. I don't even want to begin to imagine how many local jurisdictions that are part of the lawsuits. And so usually all that gets put into one court with a massive docket of all these players, and then trying to figure out the settlement. So it's more complex than just national and state, but those are kind of the two biggest pieces. And so a lot of these negotiations are going on between, you know, a huge number of governmental entities and then one defendant here, one defendant there. And so some of those dollars are coming in one tranche from some settlements. Some of them are coming over multiple years. I think one of them is 16 years over time. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah.
Controller, I'm just following up on what Kerry is trying to say. I mean, we all understand the complexity and that we have to work deliberately. But are we saying that we can't say maybe in 3 months the RFP will be out, you know, have some timeline? I think if I hear that's what she's trying to say. Even in the midst of this, you know, we should at least have a plan. I mean, if you have a plan, then we might achieve it, we might not. But if I understand you, Kerry, is that what at least have some goalposts that we're trying to get to?
Yeah, I feel like it's just kind of broad, and we're saying a lot of things. And like today was great and all to hear from all the people what they're doing, but to be honest, most of us that are here know quite a bit about this stuff already. So if we can do some actual work to start putting the process together, I think, and have a timeline for that, then that would make sense. And I was just trying to figure out, because I keep hearing the RFP thing, and I'm like, well, who are we sending an RFP to? Like, I'd like some more clarity on that, because I mean, are we talking about insurance companies? Are we talking about?
So I'll try to answer this one more time. So I'm gonna do it the third time. The third time is it's not sent to a specific group or person. It is posted through the government process, which means it is out for anyone and everyone out there who wants to put in information for a request for information, and then subsequently a request for proposal. So it's not a specific group. I don't have a list.
I'm saying it wrong. So what do we want them to request information about to do?
If I may, Dr. Moore, let me clarify just another layer more. So right now, the state in which we are proceeding is a state of requesting for information. That means you all as experts, me in meetings with stakeholders and potential vendors and potential applicants. Once we have solidified that information, then we can move forward from the draft to an actual, as the controller is saying, solicitation. And then at that point, that means then communication about that proposal has to end, because that follows our government procurement process. So to speak to the timeline then, as soon as we can finalize this initial request for proposal, then we can make that submission public, and then it will depend on the feedback we get. It's like a job posting in that sense, is that we're asking for anyone and everyone, as the controller has said, to let us know if they can meet our needs, how, and then we would go through that review process. And again, that has steps to it, but it will continue to allow us to move forward. So once we, as a group, collectively discuss the ins and outs of this first solicitation, then we'll close our information period. and move on to the next period, which is being in that receiving solicitation period. So that the email that Amanda sent to all the board, the council members, is that that's the start of the request for information. So that email went out on the 26th of September. And she asked for everyone to schedule some meetings with her to make sure that this draft scope of work, is the one that's titled SOW, is going to get us the kind of the lay of the land, the survey. That was one of the pieces in there, the data that is needed for the council to make the determination of where the funding should go. So this informational period is not something overly formal in the sense of it goes published, but once we get to the point of actually having a scope of work that will be a third party that's assisting our office and the council with getting this kind of either survey, data, research, fact-based kind of information that the council determines they think they need, then that goes through that formal request for proposal. It will be categorized based on the type of entities that would likely provide this. And so when it goes to a central registry for when anyone who wants to do business with government, it gets promoted through that. So in the sense of who does it go out to, it does go out to everyone, but they have ways of working with the state to make sure it's going out to qualified entities who can provide those services. And then it has a very strict timeline that's associated with that for solicitation. So typically they're posted for at least 30 days. Then there's a response period where we're reviewing what those proposals have come back, evaluating them based on whatever we think is the right way to evaluate someone who might provide these services, whether that's qualifications, years of providing things, other experience doing this potentially in other states. If there's an entity out there that's already done a survey of healthcare providers in Missouri, and they say, we can do that because we've done this before, we can evaluate that, and then provide a decision on who has the best value to the state and to the council to provide the services. So the informational piece is to make sure we're asking for the right services to be provided, to give the information to the council. So that's the first step. Then it's actually publishing RFP, which does have a very, the RFP itself will have a very distinct timeline. So we won't be without a timeline. It's just a matter of, we want to make sure that we're getting the information from each council member, and that's why we're asking to make sure we schedule meetings with you and conversations with Amanda. So the sooner we can get through that, the faster we can get through getting to that RFP phase. And that has a very specific timeline associated with it. But until we finish getting all the information, we can't set that timeline.
It was done. No.
Well, see, I think anybody who's applying for this fund, I think we ought to demand certain things. One, that they tell us how they're going to integrate with all the existing programs in opioid abatement. We make them do that work for us. The other thing is we make them provide a history of what they've done in the area of opioid abatement. Prove it up, and any and documentation, objective documentation of their success or failure, whatever their data shows. And then we ought to mandate objective measures of results. And that is just kind of the general framework of, we can add as much stuff on as we want, but you make them do the work.
Well, and the one other piece, of course, is that there'll be areas that have nothing going on that need training. And so we'll take the RFP for the trainers to get stuff out to areas that have literally nothing going on.
Yeah.
I guess when I received your email, what I was wanting to find was possibly maybe another committee who has just put out an RFP, and what does that look like? Just to kind of see, even though that's not our area, but just to familiarize myself with the process.
Yeah. So I currently, just this month, review grants for the Canadian Institute for Health Research, CORE, was based at Outcomes Research Institute, federal agency, and NIH. And I think that's why I want to say, maybe with you, we can talk about the details, but I think each one of those mechanisms, obviously they put out RFPs or different, whatever they call them, different things, but then they have different RFPs. They are very prescriptive. Like Dr. Mills said, we're gonna tell the people that are asking us for money what they have to do to get that money.
Yeah.
And so it's not like, we just have to build the job application so that people have to apply the right way.
That's right.
And if we do that, our lives, and that's why I was asking who's reviewing these things, because I've been on the side of it quite a lot. If we ask for the right job applications, our lives will be way easier. Than if they're telling us about stories about this or that, and we're like, we don't care. We want to know your objective measures.
Right.
So we really I know it may seem, and I'm not really here to defend the state government at all, but I really do think this is a unique mechanism because other states have gotten this funding or similar type without the structure and have not done well.
Right.
And so I do think that we can do this, and I think that we can, build the job application, so to speak, so it actually is easier for people to interact with, but they have to do the work at the end of the day. So
That's
I mean, it's just part of it. It's got to be set up in a manner that, one, for me, I would rather go ahead and have a process before I even have appointees and I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we're just the staff. You're the council. So I'm not going to go and start that process until there's a council because you're the ones that need to give us the guidance upon how we're going to set up the job application. So, that's one reason we're not further ahead than we are because we just got names for all people in the first meeting a few months ago. Yeah. So, and it takes a while. So, I mean, there were vacancies and appointments just 4 months ago. So literally it just started. But, the last thing we want to do is go and say, oh, here, let's go ahead and have it ready for y'all. When, no, wait, you're the experts and we need your input to build that job application. So,
Comptroller, this is Catherine. I really appreciate the time that your staff is taking on this. This is so critical, and I want to make sure that we're doing everything appropriate by law, by procurement standards and all that. So I really appreciate the time your staff is taking on it.
Yeah, and I know it's slower, and for that I apologize, but I will just say the last thing as essentially the support agency that I want to put any of you in is that you willingly volunteer your time, you willingly put your name associated to something, and then a process was set up upon which somebody has some criticism out there, and you spent your entire careers building your reputation, and I'm going to make sure that we don't do anything because there are examples in this state and other state where that's happened, and I'm not doing that to you.
Thank
you. So, sorry.
No indictments.
Hey, yeah, sorry.
A little self-sorry.
So that's part of it is just, I've been around this process for a long time and I've seen some people that go, wow, I wish I'd have never put my name in the hat. So anyway, so that's part of it. What other questions, comments? But Amanda's reaching out to everybody. So want an example, we'll try to find an example for you. And then what else? Do you have something else you want to add, or Corey or Nikki, to this discussion specifically?
I know, and this is maybe something we repeat as we find more other needs outside the agency to find other vendors to meet other needs. So this is a structure that we're introducing you all to that is our procurement process. So as we're all learning this structure that is state government procurement process, appreciate your patience.
Yes. Very much. Okay, so then also we need to have another meeting. So I know obviously legislative session is right around the corner, and while I don't have a meeting date, then we'll also be trying to coordinate with everybody to get a month, your schedules, and get a date for our next meeting. And then lastly, before I ask for a motion and a second to adjourn, is there anything else on the topics that we had on the agenda today? Okay, so if not, then thank you for attending. Thank you for your time. May I have a motion from someone to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, may I have a second? All right. So, then I would ask for a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No, then that's 14 ayes, 0 nays, no members abstaining, and the time, thank you again, is 2:20 p.m. Thank you much.
Thank you.